kick into our Environment Committee meeting. Okay, thank you. So welcome everybody. I'm Councillor Penny Gable, the Chair of the Environment Committee. Welcome this morning. And before we begin our agenda, I'd like to invite Councillor Duffy to share a karakia, please.
Me karakia tātou. Tū taua mai I ronga, tū taua mai I raro, tū taua mai I roto, tū taua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū te Māori ora. Ki te katoa. Haumie, huie, tāne ki.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy. So firstly, apologies. We have Councillor Hikatia Ropata and Barbie Barton. Thank you. Councillor Bassett's moved that. Councillor Kirkbanand has seconded that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. The motion is carried. Thank you. Any conflict of interest? No, we're all good. And now we'll move on to public participation. We have four speakers or groups of speakers today. So welcome to you all and thank you for coming into our committee to share. So first up we have Andre van Helderen. So please, at the front there's the microphone, it's the button on the right. If you need assistance, Councillor Lee is always at hand. He's sort of, our version of a hostess. Welcome, thank you for coming.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Joe toku ingoa. I'm Jo Fagan from the Community Capability and Change team, and I am delighted to be able to introduce Andre from the Guardians of Pawatahanui Inlet, or GOPI for short. Greater Wellington has a long-standing relationship with this group, and they really are a fantastic example of what can be achieved by community volunteers over many years. Over the last, 35 years, they have transformed some muddy paddocks and an old racetrack into impressive and important habitat alongside a scientific reserve, and it hosts a variety of endangered species. And those include many ground nesting birds, which I think many people know requires an enormous amount of pest animal control to do successfully. But that is not their only impressive achievement. GOPI runs annual litter cleanups. They have a highly esteemed photographic competition. They've hosted many school visits and previously developed a school resource about cockles. And every 3 years, they do the Pawatahanui cockle count, which we understand is the longest running citizen science initiative in the country. It's coming up in November, and I would strongly encourage you to keep an eye out for more information. It's gloriously muddy fun for the whole family. We're delighted to support GOPI for many years, and this is the kind of work that we're really hoping to support more of around the region with the rollout of our Community Environment Fund and other funding initiatives. So I'll now leave it to Andre to talk more about their amazing work.
Tēnā koutou everyone, and thank you very much for that kind introduction and for the opportunity to be able to speak to you here. Just very briefly, in terms of the Pawatahanui Inlet, I'm sure many of you already know this, but it's probably what is the most important estuary in the southern half of the North Island. Significant historic, natural and cultural and recreational value. And its importance to iwi has also been recognised by the 2014 Claims Act for Ngāti Taua Rangatira, so of significant cultural interest as well. So who are we? The Guardians of Pawatahanui. I think it's already largely been covered by Joe, but those are aims and to promote, protect, maintain and foster the natural, historic, cultural values of the inlet, supporting the Harbour Accord, the Harbour Strategy and the Action Plan. And just to be very clear, you can easily be seen as a sort of very green, zealous group, but we do recognise that restoring the inlet to its pre-human state is not possible. You have to acknowledge that development is there, development continues, and also allowing responsible recreational activities on the water as well. But it's really restoring the inlet to health. So the group was established in 1991 in response to concerns at that time already around the inlet, silting, which is still an ongoing issue. And we saw examples again last week with quite a significant slip at Belmont Park, which resulted in quite a deposition of sediment in the inlet. Pollution, heavy metals, that's still continuing with all the traffic around the inlet. Stormwater, sewage overflows, which is now slowly being managed. But these are all significant impacts. And of course, also nutrient enrichment as well from activities around the inlet. And then Whitby development in the 70s and 80s, that had a significant impact on it. Other residential developments, now with Plimmerton Farm happening as well. And of course, a transmission gully. So there's a lot of pressure on the inlet. So what does GoPi do? And I'll just cover these very briefly. The ones in red are the ones, and I'll touch on them again, where Greater Wellington is very intimately involved. So we're very much a science-based organization. I'll give you more detail around the Cockle survey, access to technical information, and I'll cover that again on our website to make sure that information is produced and is available as well for interested people. Support for scientific work, any projects that we feel are worth investing in or looking into, GoPi will support. And then previously, we also inputted into the Harbour Report Card, which the Harbour Trust covers as well. But so we have input into that as well. Just a summary of some of the other activities, revegetation projects, and that, again, will be covered in quite a great detail further on. The inlet cleanup, which happens annually. Publicizing activities information. I think one of the big things you have to get is the community on board, and we try and organize as many community events as possible to make sure that people feel enthusiastic. It's a good opportunity to meet the others in the community, and also to see the difference that they make. You often get the comment afterwards, people find it really, really gratifying to see what they've done, and also the fruit of their labor once everything they've planted starts growing, or the difference the cleanup makes. So it's actually very gratifying as well. Advice and submissions, we're very active in lobbying and putting in submissions where needed. And we have a summary on our website of all the submissions we've done to date. So very active in terms of our policy lobbying as well. Pest trapping, there already is wide coverage around the inlet through a predator-free Porirua who do fantastic work. We got a very generous grant from DOC 5 years ago, which included the purchase of traps. And we've been doing complementary trapping and still ongoing around the inlet as well. And then photographic competitions. These were annual competitions that were run again to raise awareness of the inlet for people to be able to participate in photography. They're very well supported. And we use the photographs with consent in our material as well. This has now been transferred to the Porirua Harbour Trust because they cover the wider area, the entire inlet and the catchment as well. So they will be running this in future. Just our website notes all the activities, events, newsletters, submissions, reports, technical information, etc. And just a picture of the fernbird, which has been one of the beneficiaries of the restoration of the inlet. They were reintroduced at Partanui Reserve about 8 or 9 years ago, and they're actually doing really well, spreading all around the inlet. So it's a really nice success story. And that's really important as well. It can be easy to be filled with doom and gloom, but you have to celebrate your successes too. Collaboration, absolutely crucial. There's so many players, and I think that's something that I've been involved with GoPi now for the past 6-7 years, and that's I've really noticed is the collaboration that's improved because there's so many stakeholders, Greater Wellington, PCC, Ngāti Tau Rangatira, DOC, NZTA, Wellington Water, a lot of NGOs like GoPi, Rotary, the Harbour Trust, Forest and Bird, Resident Association, and I've seen a really significant improvement in collaboration and coordination across that, so which is absolutely essential, to ensure efficiency, avoid waste, and really make things happen. And the recently signed Harbour Accord is another important milestone. That was signed on Waitangi Day as well this year. So, just some examples of the work we do. The annual inlet cleanup. This happened in March. We had probably in the region of about 60 or 70 people participate in groups like the Scouts participate every year and gathered in total 350 kilograms of waste. It only happens once a year, but it sets examples for other citizens as well to pick up litter, in between the actual formal cleanups. And so it's very successful from that point of view as well. The areas where Greater Wellington Regional Council plays an indispensable role is in the cockle count. revegetation projects, and liaison on information sharing. And the cockle count, as Joe has already said, this is the longest running citizen science project in New Zealand. It's been going since 1992. Very strong community involvement, and again, collaborate closely with stakeholders. But it's important to realize that its value lies in that it's ongoing data collected over the period of 34 years, but it's only one indicator of inlet health. So it's the results you can't extrapolate and say the inlet is healthy or not. It's only one of the many indicators. So that's just an outline. What happens is every 3 years, we sample at 30 different sites around the inlet where the yellow lines are. It's very scientifically done in terms of each site has its own booklet. It shows you exactly which direction, where to start off, marked off with the marker pen, which direction to walk in, how many paces to take. And it's sampled at 4 different sites from high tide to low tide, and 3 different sampling quadrants at each site, so that it's repeated from year to year with a lot of repeatability and coordination to make sure that the results are valid. And that's done over one day or one afternoon, usually in November. Just very briefly, though, show the results over the years. The very first one was done in 1976. And on the left, you can see where the counts lay. The earliest one, I think, was done in 91, and that shows you the horrendous decline in cockle numbers, which is an indication of really poor inlet health. Since then, they've climbed. There was a temporary blip in 2016, and that followed, I don't know if you can remember, the very severe storms we had with huge sediment washed into the inlet. And so there was a temporary sort of decline there. But the last one done in 2022 showed that it was the highest level again since the start of the count, which is very encouraging, that the inlet is showing signs of restoration. And the figures there on the region of about 390 to 480 million cockles. So it's a fantastic day for family to be involved as well. So if you know of anyone who keen, we'll send out shortly, the arrangements for the next one in October. The other project that Greater Wellington has been really actively involved in is revegetation projects. And you can't unfortunately see it very clearly, but starting right at the bottom at Ivy Bay, which is a little orange splodge just to the left of the little appendix sticking out into the inlet, that's Ivy Bay. Then the next one around is Browns Bay, where there's been a lot of planting. If you move across to the top northeast corner, you see there's a lot of orange there around Motukaraka Point, where there's been a significant amount of planting. And then Kakaho, that really hasn't taken off yet, but then all along Camborne Walkway on the upper northwest, a lot of planting has happened there as well, terrestrial as well as rushes. A lot of the planting has involved rushes, and people say, why? Why are they important? Well, they're an absolutely critical component of the inlet food chain. What happens is when rushes become salt-laden, they drop off their tips, that falls into the water and feeds invertebrates, which is the bottom of your chain. And that sort of cascades upwards towards your top-tier feeders like birds and fish. And if they weren't there, that whole system would collapse. So they're absolutely crucial component of the entire inlet food chain. They're a habitat for birds. We've already seen with the fern birds how successful they are in re-establishing. They prevent coastal erosion, and you can see on that picture, which I took at Motukaraka Point, the accumulation of cockle shells in between the rushes. So it's for stabilization of rising sea level. They really play an indispensable part, and there used to be many rushes around the inlet, and with the degradation over the years, they've disappeared. So the big thing is to try and restore them where they grew. And then, of course, they filter pollutants, which is especially important along roadsides with all the heavy metals coming from tires and brakes and so. So a very good source of filtration. So this is one of our first plantings at Browns Bay. This was also done courtesy of a fund from Greater Wellington. And it shows you also the community involvement. This is a group called Aspiring Leaders Forum, which we got in collaboration with Porura City Council, and did extensive planting at Browns Bay, which was basically devoid of rushes up until that point. And they're still taking a battering because it's probably one of the most exposed bays on the inlet. We live on it, so we know very well how it does get battered. But it just shows you, what's happening. And then they say, picture paints 1,000 words. I thought I'd show you some before and after photographs. So this is on the eastern edge of Motukaraka Point in 2021. So if you just take a good look at that. And this is what it looks like now, so I'll just go back again, that you can see that complete devoid of rushes and what it looks like now. And then taking a step further, another 50, 100 meters further back, you can see what it looked like 4 years ago, and again now. So just, a significant increase in rushes there, and really healthy growth as well.
All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Motion's carried. Thank you.
So we keep going.
Okay. Okay. Oh, great. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was going. It's not much to go. So this is on the southward side again. Yeah, you can see the devoid of rushes, how they're starting to recover. This is Ivy Bay, where I'll come to now, where you've very generously given us a grant. And you can see what it looked like in 2021 and what it looks like now. And in fact, on Sunday, we had a further session where we infilled all the gaps. So if you drive past the on State Highway 58, have a look at it. We've also done terrestrial planting with makaka, salt-marsh ribbonwood and harakiki. And again, just to give you some idea, this is not only Gopi, this is PCC and Ngāti Rangatira as well. It's a collaborative effort. But just to show you from left to right in 4 years, the difference it's made. Machikaraka as well, this was infill planting done last year. This was 8 months ago, what it looks like now. Again, 8 months ago, what it looks like now. So it's really very heartening to drive around and see the changes. So this is the Ivy Bay Restoration Project. You see in red it's the last remnant really of indigenous bush that's left right next to the road, very degraded with wattle and Cape ivy. So the first planting happened there on Sunday. So really, and then the rushes around the inlet as well. Really, there you can see a picture of it, very encouraging to see. So in terms of what do we want from Greater Wellington Regional Council? Well, continued support for our projects like the revegetation projects, ongoing cockle count, information sharing. And then one thing that really would be useful is a one-stop shop repository for all things pertaining to the inlet. That's still sadly missing. PCC have tried, but their website, I think, dates back to 2018. It's all the technical reports with information pertaining to the inlet. There's so many tests that happen, and it's not coordinated, as well as a sort of calendar of community events so people can see what's happening, and also things like before and after photos. So that is something that Greater Wellington, would have the resource and the wherewithal to do. And it would be really great if we could have a one-stop shop that people could go to for all the information they need. And then, things like enforcement of speed limits for responsible ownership. So just a word of thanks. And for certain organizations, I've singled out people to say thank you because, the organization relies on some key individuals who go over and above to really make a success of it, and really acknowledging everyone who's contributed over the past 4 or 5 years. Thank you. And apologies for going over time.
Thank you very much, Andre. I've got a couple of questions. So Councillor Wolf and then Councillor Kirkman and Councillor Staples and Councillor Saw.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It's actually not going to be a question. You shouldn't have been thanking us. We should be thanking you. I don't know if you're aware, but the nature photographers in New Zealand regard the Pahatanui Inlet as being one of their top 5. Just outside Chris's house, it's an international go-to area for the Kotari, the sacred kingfisher. It's one of the few places that you can see them in their habitat, close and personal, let alone the rare and endangered. You were a little bit too modest on your ecosystem as well, because I understand that the plankton life within the Pahatanui Inlet is the strongest in the country. So it ranks with Ohiwa, Miranda, Farewell, Spit and Okarito. And, for those of you who aren't aware of those areas, they are destinations that wildlife people and photographers seek out internationally. So a big, huge thank you for what you do. And it was really interesting. Just one question, actually, on the enforcement. How would you like us to enforce the speed limits?
Well, I think it's, however you work with the harbour master or the authorities that are there. I mean, I'm not the legal expert, but just in terms of things like boating, not exceeding the limits close to, 200 meters of shore or whatever. And it's not bad, but I think it's more, I think, awareness raising as well, because people aren't often aware of what the restrictions are. So possibly awareness raising, and education, and followed by
thank you.
Enforcement. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Kirkman.
Yeah.
presentation. Looks like I might have sound now. Yeah, thank you for your presentation. A couple of points. One is, could we get a copy of the PowerPoint, please, to come through to us? Secondly, the point on the watercraft speed limits, we're not talking about paddleboards and canoes, we're talking about jet skis. And it came up at a meeting on Thursday night with Parramatta Residents Association again, and they asked me to look at that again. The issue is that currently jet skis have got to be registered, but there's no penalties for anyone who's speeding on the water. And so maybe we could ask that Grant and Alder follow up on getting penalties put in place, because in the Waikato district, which covers Taupo, there is policing of jet ski speed limits. And the second thing they need to do is make sure that launching ramps and making sure jet skis haven't got registration numbers on them, they don't go in the water. And so it's really good to bring that issue up and really appreciate that. And lastly, one of the issues there that wasn't mentioned, but through my 45 years living on the inlet there, we're aware that there were also studies being done by some California university, and they were looking at two parts in New Zealand. I don't know what's happened in that now, but there's wide interest in the uniqueness of that, particularly because of the mix of freshwater and saltwater bird areas in the inlet and that. So thank you for the work you're doing. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Love that question there. So, Councillor Staples, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do have a question. My question is around the cockles and the cockle count, and fantastic to see the numbers going up. A few years, or a couple of years back, when we were doing the Porirua Whai Tour, we had a presentation from a Maori woman who had lived around the inlet since the 70s, and it used to be a place for kaimoana, and a lot. So are they at a stage where they are suitable for kaimoana, or is that still a way to go?
Well, firstly, in terms of the numbers, as I said, showed in the slide, they're not back to the numbers that they were in 72, so they're definitely not back to where they used to be in historic times. In terms of safety, the general recommendation is no, because of the heavy metals. They filter feeders and they accumulate heavy metals, so certainly in the entire inlet. And you do sometimes see people collecting them, but the advice is do not eat shellfish out of the inlet because of particularly heavy metal contamination.
Councillor Sawa.
Cool. I'm just going to jump on the jet ski train here and just pick up the point that Councillor Kirk-Banan made. Just wondering if Gopi would also alert our Finance, Risk and Assurance Committee about the issue around jet skis, because I believe that the registration and enforcement is a difficult piece. So would that be something you would like to come to that committee to, or to be kept updated on what we can try and do in that, and how might we be able to work with the community to get a better outcome with that form of leisure craft, because we have a similar issue here in Wellington City as well.
Well, I certainly see there's opportunity to liaise, so we certainly be keen to stay in touch with you, because I believe, I'm not quite sure of the exact date, but that the jet ski club's lease comes up for reconsideration, I think in 2030 or 2029 sometime. So it is not that far away. So we'd be very keen to liaise, to see how best to operate.
Yeah, I wonder whether one of our actions is to, from the Environment Committee, to pass this on to FRAC as well, so we can escalate the issue. I know that it is difficult to put something in like Waikato Council has, but I think there is a bigger issue around Aotearoa, around enforcement and registration of jet skis.
Excellent, thank you. Oh, Councillor Bassett.
Just one silly question, but I never knew until you've talked about the names of the respective bays around it, and I just never had any idea. Is it possible, or are they named? Because when you drive around there, I don't think I've ever seen the names, and I just wonder whether some of those names could actually be put up and promoting the place. It's just a thought that I had. I found it very interesting.
Well, actually, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because something which I didn't touch on, because it sits probably with PCC, but an area that we feel it could do with a lot of improvement is signage. And nice information signage. You know, you go to places like Ahuriri in Napier, and they've got fantastic signage of the cultural history, the natural history. And I think that's a lost opportunity. You know, it's all the different bays that there are that you could have signage there, but particularly also in high traffic places like Dolly Varden Park, which is really, really strongly, you know, used by people, or at the Jet Ski Club, to have really nice signage up that gives you the cultural history, the name of the bay, whatever, and the natural history as well. I think there's a huge opportunity there for education and just really awareness raising, you know, of the inlet.
Okay.
So I'm glad you raised that point. Yes.
Yeah, well, it's something,
Yeah.
perhaps when submissions are called for the next year, you might put something in on that, because I think, fantastic. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for your questions. And Andre, if you could, thank you so much for coming in and sharing all that excellent presentation. And I think I'll speak on behalf of the entire committee too. If you could take back with you to the Guardians our huge appreciation and thanks. It's just so heartening to see that we are so in line with your vision as, I would say, the vision of everybody around this table and everybody within this organisation as well. And that is why we're all here. And so that collaboration that has lifted and that is in place now, I'm sure we will all be continuing to do our part to make sure that that carries on in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and thank you, Joe. Noting particular thanks there, and to the team. Thank you very much. So if I could invite Jamie Stewart to the table, please. Morena, Jamie. If I could, you button on the right there, and welcome. And if you'll introduce yourself, and thank you for coming.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'd just like to acknowledge mana whenua, Ngāti Toa Rangatira and Taranaki Whānui, especially in regards to the Belmont Regional Park, which I'm here to speak about today, the paper regarding that. Ko Araki te Mauka, ko Waitaki te Awa, ko Takatimu te Waka, ko Kaitahu Ngāti Mamo e Waitaha ki te iwi, ko Kati Hurirapa te Hapu, ko Pariraho Forest te Rupu, ko Jamie Stewart aho. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I've been a community volunteer in the Wellington region for about 15 years, firstly involved in the Macro Peak mountain bike park supporters, where I served at the time as convener, and then for the last 7 or 8 years within the group that was known as Hill Road Community Group, has become the Pariraho Forest Trust, which I now serve as convener of. The Pariraho Forest Group or Trust can be easily understood as a catchment community with a difference in that we're largely suburban households and a regional park, so private land and public land. We do a lot of pest trapping. We have a network of approximately 1,000 traps over public and private land. We do a lot of weeding, controlling weeds like Darwin's barberry, banana passion fruit, cathedral bells, and many, many others. Belmont's a very weedy place. And we also have a network of tracks and picnic areas that we have developed and maintained for our community. Our kaupapa is very much connecting people with nature to the best of our ability. It's been a long journey, our journey with Belmont Regional Park. It's been a time of great change. 10 years ago, well, 8 years ago, I've known the park for a lot longer. There was quite a significant decisions made by officers and council at the time, which focused heavily on production in our catchment. So at that time, we had a lot of weed spraying, also manuka and kanuka and native vegetation spraying in wetlands, and we had a dramatic increase in stocking in our catchment. We saw the effects of that in terms of the quality of the stream and the life within it. So that's really what what led us as a community to get together and get involved and become more active. We are largely in support of the approach that council officers are proposing to you today, with some, differences. It's a very big place, the top of Belmont Regional Park, 1,000 hectares, and any long-term sustainable ecological restoration strategy is going to be very nuanced. Very nuanced. Different places have different opportunities. Different places, need different strategies. So that's kind of sitting before us. But what you're dealing with today is making sure that we get the direction right and I guess the velocity right. Where we differ is probably our number one value in all this is protecting the awa, making sure that our streams and waterways and wetlands continue to be the priority. And in my read of the strategy, I didn't quite see that quite enough. I saw a lot of retirements around surrounding vegetation, but we have really great wetland values and rivers right up into the depths, of the currently grazed land, and I'd really like to see that noted as a priority. We've also got a big priority of giving full effect to the recreational opportunities that have been signalled in Toitu Te Whenua. It's quite, I guess I could put it as we need to create space to let those things actually happen. I'm talking repurposing of bunkers, different trails and different environments. There's a lot in there. And I think to create that space, what we need to look at is a quicker retirement than is proposed. I think there are problems with there is a tension between the linear and the agile. If you have the linear, one of the problems is that we're going to get potentially bound into, given I'm running out of time, we're going to get bound into a farming license in the future, and that farming license creates private property rights. And we need to be careful that we're not limited in giving effect to the strategic direction that you guys are giving council officers and staff and what we sort of give away there. I think potentially retiring 300-400 hectares straight away, having more along the lines of 500 hectares and phasing that down over time. Over time, we'll both achieve that and give greater certainty to any particular licence holder. But yeah, there's a lot of detail in there, and I won't go over time. But just thanks again for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for coming in. And I'm sure that there's the questions there. Can I lead off with the question, not to you, but to officers that might actually answer some other people's questions? The comment there from Jamie around putting in more priority around protecting the awa is, I'm sure that actually probably is in the intent, but perhaps it's not in there necessarily in the wording. So perhaps Jack or David, if you want to respond to that, or just a nod or something.
I was going to respond to all of the public participation with an introduction to the paper.
Great. So, Jamie, will you be able to stay on for it'll be the item very soon after public speaking?
Yeah, no problem.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, any other questions? Councillor Cook-Benand.
I'm not sure I can make it into a question, but Jamie, what I wanted to do is thank you for acknowledging Ngāti Toa today. It is the anniversary of when they signed the treaty, and it's special in that several Kiwi have signed the treaty, which was unusual, and one of the ladies signed it twice. Thank you.
We certainly see the signal involvement of mana whenua in the ongoing management of Belmont Regional Park really positively.
Great, thank you. I think that's all our Councillor Staples.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for coming in. Belmont Regional Park's my old stamping ground. I lived up there as a young person, and it was very different to what it is now. I'm sure you're aware through press that all councils are under a great deal of pressure to keep their rates down. And I'm also sure you're aware that we have other regional parks all fighting for their bit of the pie as well. So given that this is a pretty important piece of land to those around and the users. What is your group's priority if we have to choose? What are your I guess your short term priorities? Because from the short term comes the medium term, then the long term.
We're actually, we're comfortable with the undertaking to look at 20 hectares of active planting per year. We understand the cost involved with that. To be honest, it's actually been really hard to watch the council planting up quite a lot of really marginal land, really working around an existing licence that hasn't been making any money. It's been pretty terrible for us, to be honest, watching that money go into that marginal land. What we're suggesting is an increased rate of retirement. We've provided to the council officers 2 areas that we believe can naturally regenerate without undue sort of weed infestation and without limiting recreational opportunity. One of those areas is the dress circle tops between Belmont Trig and Round Hill. It's a very striking steep ridgeline, which is largely weed-free, which is coming back quite well in native vegetation, and retiring would actually improve recreational opportunity by allowing a construction of single track, greater use for bikers and walkers. And the other area that we've suggested is the Speedy Stream catchment, which again, there is gorse present. Gorse is induced by a number of things, including overgrazing. There is gorse present, and areas should be allowed to go back to gorse where that's the only option. But by retiring land, we're often actually going to restrict the future spread of gorse. We develop a grass sward, and in many places that will endure for 20, 30, 40 years, if not longer. So yeah, we actually see it as a low-cost option to retire land, that we're talking class 7 land in cases, we're talking places that are really vulnerable to erosion, we're talking places that have really potentially great wetland values, potentially great ecological corridor values. And I think one area in particular where the council's strategy doesn't really make sense is this idea that 80 hectares of land can be retired this year, but then we have to retire 80 hectares next year, 80 hectares the year after. With respect to the idea, 80 hectares that could be retired in 3 years' time could be retired now.
Right. Thank you, Jamie. And another question now from Councillor Nash, and then we'll conclude.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Jamie. Just in terms of your specific suggestion there around increased rate of retirement in those 2 specific areas, looking at the paper on our agenda today, are there things that, is that proposal consistent with the adoption of the paper and the recommendations as they stand now in your view, or do you think there are things that we need to do, determine today to enable what you're saying to take place?
Yeah, I guess in terms of the recommendations at the front of your paper, and sorry, I'm not too sure how council works on, I don't engage in this.
We aren't necessarily.
I don't engage in this too much. But there's a number D, 80 hectares per year allowed to retire. As I say, I think that could be increased to 300 or 400 hectares initially, creating a grazing licence of approximately 500 hectares, say, and then that grazing licence be allowed to be retired, 50 hectares a year. To me, that makes more sense in terms of what the landscape is saying to me in terms of where it wants to grow back, where the pressure points are, where the recreational opportunities could be. So that would be my main suggestion, is having a look at that number D and seeing whether that's the right thing. I'd also say one of the problems with retiring 100 hectares a year is I've got real concern that the internal fencing of the farm, which is not in a great state, is not going to be up to, actually having native trees behind it. We're switching to the onus of having trees on one side versus stock. We're going to need to protect those trees. And if you retire 100 hectares a year, you're going to be putting an awful lot of money into that internal fencing to make it work.
Thanks, Jamie.
Right, thank you. Thanks everybody for your questions. Thank you very much, Jamie, for coming in. And I think just to let you know that, the people who wrote the strategy, have been working on this, are in the room. So it would have been really good for them to hear what you came in to share on behalf of the trust. So thank you for doing that. You know, this kind of conversation is really good, so we all know what everybody's thinking and meet one another as well. So that's really cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. So the next person I want to invite up is Anthony Davies from the Friends of the Belmont Regional Park. Morena, Anthony.
Morning all, how are we?
Great.
Jaws.
We are great.
Oh, excuse me. I'm Anthony Davies. I'm the convener of the Friends of the Belmont Regional Park, and we are a umbrella group that interested in the integrity of the park, and we work to support other volunteer organisations within the park to achieve ecological outcomes and to work to improve the park. I would like to say that we are generally in support of the planting plan, reforestation farm reduction strategy proposed. We as a group are generally in favour of the goal of regenerating the natural environment in the area of the Belmont Regional Park. However, within this acceptance, a range of concerns were raised from the membership, and we hope that these will be able to be considered when enacting the strategy proposed. We understand the amount of planting proposed per year will vary as factors allow, that the low-hanging fruit of steep terrain, gullies and regenerating areas will be balanced with grazing licences and fire risks. We understand the complexity in this and want to be able to work with these processes in order to be able to facilitate community involvement to support the effort of regenerating the Belmont Regional Park. Our concerns are as follows. We're concerned about the amount of natural regeneration retirement area per 100 hectare block. With 20 hectare planted, we end up with an 80 hectare unplanted and left to naturally regenerate blocks, an 80-20 split per paddock shaped section of retirement. As volunteers, we do not need to be concerned about the amount planted and maintained by Greater Wellington Regional Council. That's great. But we look upon the amount of gorse and wattle and cherry and blackberry that will inevitably spring up through the rank grass and go, great, let's clear spiky pest plants in order to plant trees. We need to clear the space. And as we garden out the smaller patches of the wrong plants, of pest plants in the bush in order to complete bush cover in certain catchments, we look over at the next regenerating paddock of retired quarry, and it is happily seeding it all with pests for the volunteer groups and council to deal with. We have to be careful to balance success with workload to increase enjoyment of the volunteer groups that will be necessary to achieve a substantial rewilding of Belmont Regional Park. As the area of industrial farming reduces, the cost of maintaining farming and park infrastructure will land further upon park management budgets, and track maintenance will be an ongoing cost. Access is critical or crucial for the enjoyment of the park, to be able to cater to the variety of different levels of skill and fitness levels of those who wish to enjoy the park and participate in the rewilding and regeneration. Efficient access allows people more time to be in the park doing the work that they like to do, and it expands the idea of the access and accessibility of the park for the suburbs that surround it. So it allows people to buy into the area by access. As each block is developed, we would like to make sure that all opportunity is taken to develop effective track networks that allow pest plant control, horse riding, pest animal control, mountain biking, and maybe some sites for camping. Yes, some farm tracks will become rank grass single tracks, but the opportunity for community engagement at this point should not be overlooked. A large portion of the membership of the Friends of the Belmont Regional Park understands and supports the importance of climate mitigation strategies, the importance to Greater Wellington Regional Council of the carbon managed by the planting of the forest, and the savings it will have for the Wellington region in the future are acknowledged as well. So the goal of planting the whole park in light of this has helped maintain interest and build motivation that could lead to greater community engagement. Having ambiguous targets or targets too hard could dent this participation. Community involvement will be crucial to the success of the proposed strategy and is one of the aims of the park's plan. In light of this, FOBUT would like to emphasise the importance of community engagement when acting the planting and master plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I just want to invite any questions from anybody. No, no, that's really good. That shows you've covered every question we might have had. So thank you very much. And I just want to check: are you going to be able to stay on for a little bit while we have while we do the paper? Yes. Great, thank you. Okay, and then our last speaker is Andy Mitchell from Hutt City Council. Oh, and he's online. Welcome. It's Councillor Andy Mitchell, sorry. I'll let you get going on your presentation, Andy. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. I'll just check that you can hear me okay first. Yeah?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Kia ora koutou, ko Andy Mitchell tōku ingoa. I am a Hutt City Councillor, and thank you for the invitation to speak today on behalf of our council about the proposed reforestation of Belmont Regional Park, including the Kilmister block, which is owned by our council. Lower Hutt City Council purchased a 632 hectare Kilmister block in the 1950s for housing and roading purposes, which never eventuated. Instead, the land was leased to the Department of Lands of Survey and later Land Court for farming purposes. It was, along with a few other blocks of land owned by Lower Hutt, Petone and Porirua councils and the Crown, incorporated into plans for creation of a Belmont Regional Park in the 1970s. 25 years ago, Hutt City Council actually proposed to sell off the block, but rescinded its own decision to sell based on public opposition. Notably, the block was offered for sale to Greater Wellington Regional Council in 2000, and when that offer was declined, we instead vested the land into a recreation reserve, which is managed by Greater Wellington Regional Council as part of the wider park. Hutt City Council strongly supports the plan to recloak the park, and HCC has previously submitted to Greater Wellington Regional Council on this. Our climate action pathway, published in 2022, included an aspiration to accelerate reforestation of our landholding in Belmont Regional Park where feasible, as part of wider plans to plant more native trees on council land to support biodiversity and improve carbon sequestration. The pathway report noted that if 80% of the around 450 hectares of Hutt City Council owned grasslands in the regional park were retired and planted in native forests by 2025, it would have had carbon sequestration benefits for approximately 86,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent by 2050. Those dates have slipped a little, but the significant carbon sequestration potential of our land remains. Hutt City Council supports the proposed staged master planned approach with significant involvement from mana whenua, conservation and recreation groups and local communities. We note the considerable cost of active restoration, and as representatives of our ratepayers, who are also your ratepayers, endorse the use of low-cost methodologies. We encourage Greater Wellington to look at the example of Heniwai Reserve on Banks Peninsula as a success story for natural regeneration with a management strategy of minimal interference, allowing gorse to serve as a nursery crop. Or to the Tīmata method developed through the Our Land and Water National Science Challenge to enable low-cost, broad-scale retirement of farmland, mimicking natural reversion processes by using unpalatable manuka and kanuka as nursery crops for succession trees to establish under in future. Consider too the creation of seed islands as currently being trialled by Trees That Count and Tane's Trees Trust to boost natural regeneration. Hutt City Council is keen to be involved. We've recently carried out a trial at Silverstream landfill using dried biosolids as a fertiliser to aid plant growth. Native plants in the trial with the highest application of biosolids grew the fastest, confirming that due to their content of nutrients and organic material, biosolids have significant fertilising and soil improvement characteristics. With further investigation into chemical composition and cultural appropriateness, we may well be able to offer dried biosolids to aid in the reforestation of Belmont Park. This potential win-win could divert significant amounts of biosolids from our landfill, reduce the emissions from anaerobic decomposition, and accelerate the establishment of plants. Hutt City Council operates a low carbon acceleration fund and a community climate action fund to support community groups to help decarbonise our city. These could and already do, in fact, fund restoration and planting projects by local community groups like the Pariraho Forest Trust, who you heard from, again helping to accelerate re-establishment of native bush. Finally, I encourage your officers, as I often do ours, to lean into the goodwill of conservation groups and communities. There is a wealth of knowledge, experience, and enthusiasm for not just restoration planting, but feeder activities like nursery production and seed collection out there. And Belmont Regional Park, like the Hutt River Corridor, which lies beneath it, is a significant landmark in our city, which many of our people will be happy and willing to help enhance. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you very much, Andy. It was a really, really good to hear from you on behalf of the council. So much appreciated. I'll just invite, has anybody got any questions? No, that's really good. Are you able to stay online while we... That's great. Thank you very much. So that'll conclude our public participation. I'll now move us to the minutes of our last meeting on Thursday, the 15th of May. Do I have a mover? Councillor Bassett, and seconded by Councillor Saw. Anybody want to raise anything? Right, in that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, the motion is carried. So we'll now move to item number 5. And David, are you coming up to the table? So item number 5 on the hot topic of the day. And I just want to acknowledge that it was really helpful for me as a member of this committee to have Jamie and Anthony and Councillor Mitchell speaking and public speaking for us to get a sense of the views of the community and where they sit in terms of supporting but also raising areas that we still need to be kind of thinking about. So perhaps David and Jack, if you want to introduce the paper, thank you.
Morena koutou, councillors. Ko David Boone toku ingoa. Indeed, this is the hot topic of the day. What Jack and I will aspire to do in the next few minutes is tone that down to the warm topic of the day and leave you all comfortable with what this paper is all about. So thank you for the opportunity to introduce this paper. It is a rather complicated piece of work. So what I'll do in the introduction is attempt to summarize what this paper is all about. And respond to all of the public participation that we've just heard. So bear with me as I try to work through that. I'll deal first with my attempt to summarize what this paper is about before I get into the public response. This restoration strategy, in some ways, it already exists. So Toituta Whenua, the Parks Network Plan, has already set out the restoration intent and strategy of Belmont Regional Park. This paper that's before you today is taking that a step further and adding clarity around what implementation looks like. So I think there's a few key things missing in Toituta Whenua. Not being critical of Toituta Whenua, it's just that the description of what the implementation journey looks like in terms of thinking about it as a reaction from the land. Once we take an action, the land will react. And I don't think Toituta Whenua took those steps of saying this is what the reaction looks like. So in my very basic summary, this paper is telling that story of once we begin this path, this is what we're going to encounter. And Toituta Whenua does not give us clarity or guidance around the time scale or the pace in which we're going to attempt to undertake this challenge. It also doesn't indicate the resources we have available to tackle it. So those are two key, really important bits around our ability to act in the land's reaction. There's another important bit of this paper before you that's attempting to tie together various strategic guidance documents. Conveniently, those are all very well aligned, but this is a one-stop shop to say that the Whanganui Atara Whaitua Plan, the Pororua Whaitua Plan, Plan Change 1, Te Mahiri Wai, all of these things are speaking very similar language in terms of the future direction. Some of the things I just mentioned didn't exist when Toituta Whenua was finalized. Some of them did, but this is the one-stop shop to say all of these strategic direction pillars are pushing us in the same direction. Lastly, this paper is really honing in on the dependency we have to collaborate with community, and I think through the process of drafting this document, that's been a little bit misunderstood, that we're getting ahead of ourselves saying this is what the restoration looks like without community involvement, where I would describe this as an interpretation, it's a translation of what Toitu Te Whenua says we're going to do. And the detailed planning, the collaboration, the engagement with community, we haven't done that yet. That comes next. Once we get this general description of this is the path we're going down and these are the things we will encounter, how we navigate that path with community is the work to come. So hopefully that helps add some clarity to the 85 paragraphs that are before you with 2 very technical attachments. There's a lot in it. So I'll just work through in order from the public participants, Jamie, Anthony, and Councillor Mitchell, and hopefully I'll cover things, but if there's questions that follow afterwards, very well. So firstly, the point was raised that we are encountering a scale issue here, and there was quite a lot of commentary around the 80-20 concept of what we've described in the paper. I'll point out, in particular, paragraph 25 says that this is not going to be a linear approach of 80 hectares natural regeneration, 20 hectares intensive restoration annually. That's going to be an average over a decade. And what I'm describing there is that with the resources we have available, this roughly 10-year mission that we have in front of us, we are going to rely heavily on natural regeneration. We are going to encounter weed infestation and gorse. We're going to encounter the need to install fire breaks, the need to increase maintenance costs to keep access and tracks open where gorse is wanting to take over. We are going to encounter that in a big way. I'm not saying by any means that it's going to be precisely 80 hectares of natural regen and 20 hectares of intensive regen annually. The detail in which we decide where to retire, the precision of planning what it looks like on the ground, we haven't done that yet. And that's what we are dependent on community groups that know the park, in some cases better than we do, to help us with that detailed planning. It was also mentioned that protecting the awa isn't present in there. Fair point. I think that could have been, should have been more explicit. The reason that it wasn't explicit in there, we were describing the vastness of the roughly 1,000 hectares of the grazed area that we have to deal with. There are many waterways, riparian areas, wetlands within that 1,000 hectares, but the story that was told is focused on that broader sort of 1,000 hectares in the 80-20 concept I just described. We absolutely will prioritize wetland restoration, riparianism in the gullies, but area-wise, that's a smaller proportion of the area we have to deal with than the big vast paddocks that we're attempting to restore. So simple apology on my part, I should have made it more clear that the protection of the awa, riparianism, wetlands is definitely part of the plan. It just wasn't explicit in the paper. The farming license intent, we absolutely do not want to lock ourselves into a status quo regime. We are operating in an unfortunate situation of urgency where the license ends in January. We have to, there's not immediate pressure to have a renewed license in February. We do have some time up our sleeve, but we don't want natural regeneration process to get carried away for too long before we don't want it. We want to be deliberate around our restoration approach rather than having an unknown process of restoration upon the expiration of the grazing license. So that's what this is all about, is being deliberate around our restoration approach. Absolutely agree that we need to take a significant step towards phasing out grazing. If we are to renew grazing, whether that's 200 hectares, 400 hectares retired in what I'm referring to as the phase 1 grazing retirement, we're not sure. Again, that depends on the paddock subdivision, the gullies that we prioritize, the fire risk assessments. That detailed planning will inform us exactly what the next grazing license looks like, but phase 1 grazing retirement will be significant. We will then get into a space of master planning and restoration planning. Let me quickly go on a tangent. Master planning and restoration planning are the same thing. Restoration planning is the areas within the park we're going to restore, and there's a spatial planning element of that. So master planning, restoration planning, same thing. To date, we have been forced into separating those two things because our restoration work through the Low Carbon Acceleration Fund really accelerated 3-4 years ago, and we got straight into restoration work delivery ahead of having master planning to guide us. So we were forced into just sort of ad hoc restoration planning in lieu of master planning, but we never wanted to separate them. So I just wanted to be clear about that. So phase one grazing retirement, a significant portion of the 1,000 hectares we're looking to retire. That will then be to be more precise around the gullies, the paddocks, the sensitive areas we're going to retire, and that will lead to phase two, phase three grazing retirement within the next few years. And again, the precision of the time frame involved, the scale involved, we haven't done that detailed planning, but the phase one retirement will be significant, and it will be as short term as we can make it. Hang on just a minute, let me catch up with my notes. The public participation also noted some disappointment in the restoration to date. I'll try to interpret Jamie's comments on that when I spoke with Jamie before the meeting, so I think I understand this pretty well. But we're referring to Western Belmont Waitangirua, and that was the product of having a big bang of a restoration program we did not have a parks restoration program, and then almost overnight we had a multi-million-dollar program, and we set forth to retire big vast areas. We spent loads of money with intense planting over vast areas. This is described a little bit in the paper. And could we have done a better job prioritizing and planning sensitive areas to start with in the park first? Absolutely. And that's a bit of what we're describing in this restoration strategy going forward, is that we want to be more careful, more deliberate around our restoration effort rather than just spending heaps of money and doing blanket restoration. So I agree with those comments that some of the restoration work to date has been disappointing. That said, it's not all bad by any means. I'm just suggesting with a little bit more nuance and careful planning, we could have done a probably more effective job, which is what we're trying to do going forward. Will the design of future restoration work be dependent on community input? Absolutely. The opportunities that were mentioned, Speedy's Reserve as a sensitive opportunity area, other places were mentioned. Absolutely, that detailed design will be enriched by community involvement, assisting us in the where and how and the pace. We can facilitate that. The real value will be added with the people that are in the park caretaking and understand the way the park's behaving the best, which are the key user groups and people that are involved in the park day to day. There were some comments around, touching back on the 80-20 concept, and the paper describes a little bit about the technical approach where we'll focus on intensive restoration adjacent to existing native vegetation. That's mainly just because of the proximity to a natural seed source. And the periphery effect of wanting to add to areas that are already ecologically better off. That is not a black and white rule by any means. There will be a combination of the riparianism, focusing on areas of pure restoration where there might not be an adjacent seed source. This will be a very nuanced approach. So the story we're trying to tell in this strategy is very broad, and the finer detail will be sorted as we work out the restoration master planning work in the months to come. And lastly, the concerns around maintaining community involvement, avoiding ambiguity. I agree that's critically important. We want the community behind us. We want them to be enthusiastic and to feel valued. We want them to see their progress. I believe that will come through the master restoration planning, buying into the detail of how we're going to approach this and maintaining that engagement in the mahi as we move forward. That said, and again, touching on the 80-20 concept, the sometimes demotivator when the community sees gorse taking over, that's the main, one of the main points we're saying here is that there is going to be a lot of that. We are going to be relying heavily on natural generation. That it will be the reaction of the land if we take this approach. And that's due to a combination of the scale and the pace in which we have to try to get the job done. So I'll leave it there. Hopefully I've covered the key points there. Oh, sorry, there's one other comment I made. Councillor Menschel referred to a few other learning examples and models we could follow. Hiniwai Reserve, Banks Peninsula, the Tamate method, etc. There are many innovative opportunities out there to learn. That's bread and butter for us in the restoration space on public and private land. We are trying to facilitate learning and innovation with all of our restoration work. And hopefully this paper that's before you, this approach that we're describing, innovative learning, collaborative with the community, what we're aspiring to, and I think this really hits the nail on the head, is that at some point in the future, other restoration efforts will refer to the Belmont method.
I was just thinking that too. Thank you very much, Dave. That's really comprehensive. For me, that certainly covers everything that was in my mind. I'm going to invite questions. Councillor Staples.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you're working out with the community appropriate places for grazing and or regeneration, etc., can I please ask that Greater Wellington make sure that they have some stock experts adding to this, because we've seen it before and we've heard it in the conversations that often what is the ideal for restoration is not the ideal for stock, and we do not wish, I'm sure, to be held up as an example of having stock mistreated. So I think it's really important that that expert advice, and not from the grazing licence holder, I am not suggesting that at all, I'm talking about an independent person who can make sure that the advice comes into any paper that we're making a decision on around animal welfare and stock health. And my second question, please, and this is just for my own knowledge, it's almost semi-irrelevant, but Councillor Mitchell was giving us a history of the ownership of the park and said that Hutt City bought it in 1952, yet I have strong memories in the early 70s of knocking around with Christine Kilmister, and her father Ron was still farming the Kilmister block. So I just think it's important that the history is correct in what is recorded, although it doesn't make any it's not material to our decision making today. So if you could just confirm that for me and let me know offline, that would be cool. Thanks.
Through the chair, how would we like to respond one by one, or after the questions are all on the table?
Sorry, I was just consulting. So what was that, Dave?
Would you like me to respond one by one, or after the councillors' questions are all on the table?
No, just to Councillor Staples.
Thanks, Councillor Staples. I heard your feedback in the workshop we had a month ago. There is a paragraph specific to the need to engage expert farm system advice along the way. I couldn't tell you what paragraph is in there. It's in, but it is in there. And I described it in a way that says we'll rely heavily on our environment restoration team that are working in the farm system, farm environment planning space, and or engage external farming expertise to help us with the planning. And there's also the animal welfare being an important issue is in there as well. Yeah. And in regards to the storytelling and the history, absolutely. We are doing a significant amount of work in a storytelling space, telling the stories of Mana Whenua. and how we blend that together with post-colonialism history as well is ongoing value. It just gives the users a sense of ownership and understanding what's come before.
Great, thank you. I have questions from Councillor Duffy and then Councillor Connolly.
Thanks, Dave. The master planning process, councillors have been quite interested in that for a while, but I think there's still perhaps ambiguity as to what that means. I mean, it's just a word, and there would be different ways to go about it. Could you paint a picture of what does it look like over the next 6 months, say? Is it meetings? Is it wānanga? Is it consultation, sending out a survey? Is it, yeah, what does it actually look like? How would a member of the public or a community group sort of be approached, interact? What does it mean?
Excellent question. Thank you. I'll give you a status update of where master planning's at, and then I'll answer the question around what it looks like 6 months out. We have been talking about the delay, the slow progress of master planning for years. I think we've reached a turning point with Mana Whenua where we are underway, in particular at Whareroa Queen Elizabeth Park. We are on the brink of engaging external help, a consultancy to help us with the drafting of documentation, the landscape architecture mapping, telling the story of what the spatial blueprint looks like for the park so we can then consult the public. So as I've told you before, we're absolutely committed to preparing that public consultation package with our Mana Whenua partners before we consult. So we are not consulting iwi, that we're actually designing the package before we consult. And so that is underway. We're making progress at Whareroa, and our partners Ngāti Toa and Atiawa are very comfortable with that approach at Whareroa. So we're looking to engage the same consultancy and run a parallel process at Belmont. The people that are involved in the Ngāti Toa space will also be involved in the Ngāti Toa representatives that are involved at Whareroa will be the same people involved at Belmont. So they're happy with the process. I've had a conversation with Taranaki Whanui and Roputiaki about this parallel process idea, and generally supportive. Roputiaki, there was some concerns around Taranaki Whanui autonomy and being forced into a Whareroa process. So we're currently just trying to resolve any concerns that Taranaki Whanui might have, seeking to facilitate a connection between Atiawa, Ngāti Toa, and Taranaki Whanui so they can all be supportive of this parallel process, which I'm really confident we'll get there within the next couple of weeks, I think. So that will enable us to get on with the work required to answer your question around what it looks like in the next 6 months. So my summary of that is that we need to tell the story around, we've referred to master planning as the spatial blueprint. It's literally maps and drawings of what we're going to do in the park. So it considers the user experience, how people are going to flow through the park, what activities will be undertaken where, mountain biking, equestrianism, restoration, retirements, etc. And we need to put that on a map. We need to also, in Belmont's case, it's really, really important that we weave in the time scale of how the park will change over the next decade, in particular with the restoration retirements. And we need that designed in a way that's easily understood by the public in a landscape architecture, pictures and drawings sense, and a map sense, very clear documentation. The design and partnership with Mana Whenua before we consult is absolutely critical, as is the key park users. So we do not want to consult blindly on a master plan that the community hasn't seen. We want the community's fingerprints all over it. So the speakers that were here this morning, other key park user groups, we want their input in the master planning design of that spatial blueprint articulation before we actually consult on it. So in the next 6 months, I'm hoping that facilitated process of getting people's fingerprints on it will be underway in a big way. And once we engage that external help, that will be their job.
Okay. Councillor Connolly and then Councillor Lee.
Morena team, thank you for your paper and for your extensive accompanying notes. Really appreciated. I do have a question, but I wanted to preface it by saying that I guess the Parks Network Plan has kind of bookended my involvement in Greater Wellington Regional Council so far. When I was first elected in 2019, it was being worked up, and then during the COVID period, we narrowed down what that Parks Plan would actually look like. And you've been at pains today not to rag on the contents of that paper, and I appreciate that because there are people who wrote it here with us today. But if anything, it seems like we were overly ambitious with what we were trying to achieve, because my understanding of what we committed to was a plan over 10 years between 2020 and 2030, which puts us midway through the middle of that plan now, whereby at the end of that period, 2030, we would have eliminated grazing from Belmont Park. I think at one stage we even envisaged that we would have replanted the whole park in new native plants dug personally, but we quickly realised that just as 9 pregnant ladies can't make a baby in a month, we weren't going to actually achieve that. There were just not enough plants. The ecosystem that required us to make that happen just wasn't in place. So we've learnt a lot, but I guess I still have in my mind this vision of a 10-year vision that will be achieved in 2030 that involved actually eliminating grazing over that period and a really full-on attempt to get the park revegetated. And I guess I'm feeling a little bit like this is stepping us away from that original vision. And that may be, as I've said, because it was too hard to achieve. We may have been overly optimistic in what was doable. So do you think that we are moving us away from the original vision that we emphasised in Toitū Te Whenua? Is there a need to actually de-specify the areas of revegetation that we're going to plant, given that we've heard that that will be led by the parts of the park that we're revegetating? That there would be parts, i.e. Speedy's catchment, which we could do a whole lot in one hit. I just don't see the need to specify that 80 hectares when you've said yourself it's not going to be linear, and the community has identified patches that they would like to see regenerated in one hit. So, and also the grazing areas, like particularly that's the thing that doesn't seem, in my mind, to be in keeping with the original Toitū Te Whenua. I would like to see any extension in grazing areas to be brought back to this committee, because my understanding is that the original focus was to reduce that within the 10-year period down to nil, and it doesn't seem like we're in keeping with that original kaupapa anymore.
Thank you, Councillor Connolly. There's a bit in that. I'll work through the response. Dealing first with the comment around Toitū Te Whenua being a 10-year plan and being done in 2030. There's a bit in that. I think as an organization, we have on numerous occasions released plans that were ambitious. And from an officer perspective, I think if we're being very forthright and an honest answer on that one, we are not going to be done in 2030. And there's a few reasons for that. I think when we engage in a conversation with community and talk about future aspirations, it's a really exciting space. And we then say, okay, yep, we can do that. We all agree we should do that. Should and can are two different things. And I think as an organization, we've learned a lot around what business as usual adaptation actually looks like. So with Toitū Te Whenua, with our Whaitua implementation plans, there's a lot of aspirational stuff in there that requires significant shift from BAU adaptation to do more. So in many cases, we're using our existing capacity and resources, just hanging on to BAU. And the easy answer is more resource, which is, as you well aware, is not possible in most cases. So that the BAU adaptation is really, really difficult. So I think, and that's getting straight to the heart of one of the key things I'm trying to communicate with you today, is that the restoration approach, what was originally envisaged in Toitu Te Whenua, is we're starting now with at least a 10-year journey ahead of us. And the grazing restoration at Belmont in particular, the main reason we're starting now is the grazing license was a 10-year term from 2016 to 2026. So potentially we could have undone that. We could have sent the lawyers in and undone the grazing license. We didn't. So we are literally getting started on the restoration of 1,000 hectares at the beginning of next year. Are we moving away from the intent of Toitu Te Whenua? Absolutely not. The long-term objective is precisely the same as what Toitu Te Whenua describes, and this paper is trying to communicate with you what implementation looks like to get there. Again, do we need to specify the 80-20 concept? Perhaps not. That we could go about more sort of chunky restoration blocks, all of Speedy's catchment, a significant chunk of Korokoro, etc. The 80-20 has caused a lot of confusion, and in hindsight, I should have described it differently. It's describing that we are going to rely heavily on natural regeneration. And with that, you get gorse, maintenance of tracks, etc. It won't be 80-20. It's just sort of a crude way of saying we're going to rely more on natural regeneration than we are on intensive planting and weed management. The question of will future grazing licenses be brought back to councillors? That's one thing in particular I would like a very clear steer in the decision on. The way the paper is written is that future grazing licenses will not be brought back to council if we are satisfied that any future grazing license follows the process set out in Toitu Te Whenua. It's a very robust process of a restricted activity that says any future grazing has to be for the purpose of restoration and recreation activities. And there's a very high threshold in Toitu Te Whenua. And if any future grazing licenses are consistent with the community-led master restoration planning approach, if we get a future grazing license applicant to say, I want to graze stock to help you implement your plans that the community have endorsed, I don't see the need to bring that grazing license back to council. So that's the way the paper is describing it. If you would like all future grazing licenses to come back to council, we'll need to do an amendment to what's in the paper.
I'll just add to that, if I may, through you, Madam Chair, just to reinforce that the message in Toitu Te Whenua, the direction of travel is very clear, and we are planning to take the car to Invercargill, and to answer your excellent analogy with a quote. And so this is a shift. It is really a shift that we're signalling to be really clear that we're using grazing as a tool to help us to restore, so to manage the weeds, to manage the rank grass, and to enable us to progressively phase it out. So we're not resiling from that direction by any means.
Just a quick follow-up. I would be happy with not bringing grazing licenses back to council if one of the criteria was consistency with the community-led master planning process. But we have been waiting 5 years for that master planning to happen, and I'm hearing that you're going to have grazing licenses coming up due before we've implemented that master planning. So in the interim, I would like those grazing licenses to come back to us. Once we've been through that master planning process, it seems entirely consistent that be the process, that the community dictate whether those grazing licenses are appropriate.
That's very clear. Thank you. If council agrees with that, I think it's a rather easy amendment in some form of a note in the paper to say that we will bring any grazing licenses back to council if the master planning reference is not available. At this stage, I'm not certain. It could be. We could move through the master planning work fairly quickly and have a very well described phase 1 grazing retreat, and have that reference point of a community-led process to assess the grazing license against. So
Did you want to respond to that? Or I was going to suggest that we'll just wait and see what Leanne says, but the possibility of whoever moves the second has a number 4 recommendation that can address that, and then we can include that in the debate.
Yes, through you, Chair. I was just about to say we could make an active amendment now, maybe to the paper, if that is probably the best way.
Yeah, well, it doesn't need to be an amendment. It's just that it's
An
additional recommendation, which people can think about what their wording might be. Okay, nice and simple though. Okay, can we move on now to, because we're kind of pushing out our time. So Councillor Lee will be the last, and then we'll look. I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, David and Jack. Just following on, just two very quick questions. Following on from Councillor Connolly's theme, retirement and restoration. It's a real long game. It's 10, 20, maybe even 30 years. I know we want to be ambitious and aspirational, but I think it's just as important to be achievable. So, do you think the 100 hectares or even 50 hectares a year is actually quite achievable?
With the reliance on the majority being natural regeneration, pest plants providing a canopy shelter for native plants to outcompete over decades, and a lower proportion, say 20%, of intensive restoration which is high stocking plants per hectare planting and weed management. The 100 hectare per year average target is achievable. That's what we've based that on, and that's that sort of loose description of 80-20. Yeah.
And so that kind of leads on me onto my second question. If we're looking at master restoration concept, are we actually looking at if we're looking at return on investment or bang for your buck? I think it was D, the staged planting approach, and is that more selective and more targeted, and would that be more achievable in terms of outcomes?
I think what you're describing is the staged planting approach is the option we're putting forth, saying that is the way to go.
Is that a smarter approach to if we're looking at outcomes?
Smarter than
if we're looking at like a blanket across a whole area.
We believe so. So the alternatives are, for example, complete retirement of 1,000 hectares of grazing all at once, or intensive restoration everywhere, similar to what we've done at Western Belmont, Waitangirua, across the whole lot. We can't afford that.
Or even breaking it into blocks.
Breaking it into blocks is difficult. We really want to avoid expenses on fencing infrastructure and subdividing paddocks in order to break it into blocks. So there's some options in that around the terrain, how the current paddock arrangement is situated, how that overlays with sensitive areas we wish to install or wish to restore, technology opportunities such as GPS shock collars on animals. Again, this is the sort of detail we haven't done yet, but generally that the story we're telling here is that the most viable method for achieving the long-term outcome is relying mostly on natural regeneration and intensive restoration at a lower proportion, with the finer detail of where and how we do that yet to come.
So using a hybrid approach, a mix of native and exotics.
There is a note about exotics in there actually, and that was in regards mainly that came up with the consideration of revenue opportunities and accelerating carbon sequestration and emissions trading. Natives aren't very good at that. So there was consideration in the options assessment of an exotic woodlot to sequester carbon and attract revenue from emissions trading. It would most likely be a eucalyptus woodlot of some sort, to be phased out over 2 or 3 decades and replaced with natives. The paper is quite specific that this decision we're putting forth today does not seek your approval on that. It just points out that we considered it. And if we were going to go down that track at some point in the future, we'd come back to you and have that conversation.
Great, thank you.
Great. So while you two were doing your Q&A, we've been pulling together an extra couple of recommendations that we'll put up on the screen. And I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder. I also had a suggestion from the chair's spot, that's me, that in the wording for 3C, just to address that issue around the average, that wording along the lines of planned planting areas of 20 hectares on average per year. And then in D, we could again go annual areas of 80 hectares on average per year. Does that stay true? And would somebody like to move these? I'm looking particularly to the ward councillors of the Belmont Park area, if they would like to be movers and seconders. Then it's your rohi.
Jason, I'm very close.
So, you're ward adjacent. Okay, so Councillor Connolly is moving and Councillor Bassett is seconding. So would you like to speak to your motions there, Councillor Connolly?
As I said, Toi Tuta Whenua, and in particular revegetation at Belmont, has been a key focus of my time on council, and I think we were overly ambitious around what could be achieved, and we're living and learning as we go. But I'm very keen that those original visions of restoring Belmont, recloaking Papatūānuku, remain our focus, and we can't get straight away from that. So I'm comfortable with the addition there, that we are still maintaining our original vision. It might take a little bit longer than we thought at the time, but as they say on the mainland cheese ad, good things take time. So
is it these upper hat sayings? Councillor Staples. Councillor Bassett, did you want to contribute to the debate? Yeah, he's flagged. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm finding this a little sad, but I'm very happy that we have this paper and that we've got this far. Some will remember that there were some of us at the table that felt when the Toi Tuta Whenua was signed off, that it was very ambitious. And there's one thing I would just like people to remember and understand. Those of us who are old enough to remember the eastern hills of the Hutt Valley, and there's only a couple of people in this room that are old enough to remember the eastern hills of the Hutt Valley being bright yellow for years, with great orange slashes that would be equivalent to thousands of road cones as they put fire breaks through them. And every year there were fires in that gorse, major fires that came down and threatened Nainai, Taita down there. And people have forgotten about that. Gorse is not some benign plant that allows the natives to come through. It's a shitty thing. It's an awful, dreadful plant that is difficult to plant through. It drops its seeds. It creates a very volatile understory, and it burns. So please don't treat it as if it's something nice that the nice little natives will come through. It's something to be taken very seriously when it comes to a fire risk. So we need to consider that when we are thinking which areas we are going to allow for native regeneration. Gorse loves the soil of the eastern and western hills. It's not a great productive area, and gorse just seems to think it's great. So please remember that. Thank you for getting us to this stage. It is a good step. I still have concerns around the pest, animals and plants that will come through with taking grazing out. But council has made that decision that that's what it's going to do. So great first step, thank you. And thank you for all the hard work that's gone into it, because it's not an easy decision or an easy situation to be in.
Right, thank you. Councillor Duthie, then Councillor Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just like to say a couple of things. So first of all, I'd just like to thank staff for the work on the paper, and particularly to acknowledge the staff who are on the ground day in, day out in a park like Belmont, the rangers in particular, the community groups who are also on the ground day in and day out, and mana whenua as well. So you can see the fingerprints of a lot of work that's come to this point. So thank you to everyone, and thanks to Councillor Mitchell and Hutt City Council for their interest and support of the work here, and I hope we can harness that enthusiasm that Hutt City Council's got to support. I'm keen to support these recommendations today with those amendments. I have a few nagging issues, but I'm not going to explore them today. I'm going to trust that there's enough flexibility and adaptability in this strategy, and that the involvement of mana whenua and community groups means that those sorts of things and things that aren't quite compatible with each other will be resolved and worked out along the way. We've just seen this morning the real value of community participation, so it's really great to have master planning getting to a point of rolling, and I think that will actually help flesh out and adapt the strategy because of that on the ground knowledge. This has actually been quite a long time coming, so you will all know that I was involved in advocating around Belmont Regional Park prior to becoming a council, and for many years, as has been alluded in public comment, the farming practice in our regional park hasn't been great. 15 years ago, there was a sustainable land management plan that identified all sorts of measures like retiring riparian strips, planting poplar poles to prevent erosion, and many of those things have never happened, and that's why we have slips in Belmont Regional Park and why we're at this point today. We've had helicopter gorse spraying for years that has sprayed native trees. Imagine how many millions of dollars of native trees it costs to replant them, that actually over the last 10 years under our Greater Wellington's watch we have actually sprayed. The dead spars and headless pungas are there today as monuments to that time, and that spray went in streams and wetlands too, and has affected the aquatic health. We've had cattle in streams and wetlands continuously. That's slowly improved over time with additional fencing, and we're on a progression to improve that. And there's high erosion risk land in there that is identified in all the indexes as right at the top of erosion risk, and it's still grazed today. So moving towards retiring those high risk areas is really important. So this is really positive to me. There's been talk about the time frame, and the way I think about it is actually retirement of the livestock grazing is actually a short-term thing. It could actually be done tomorrow. It could take 5 years, could take 10 years. Restoring a forest is actually a generational thing. There will be no forest in 20 years' time. There'll be the beginnings of a forest. There are areas of Belmont that were retired 100 years ago, and they are still the beginnings of a forest, and they are still lacking many of the species that you would expect. So restoration of forest and other ecosystems around wetlands and along exposed tops and so on, it's a very, very long game, way outside our 10-year time frame. The question really is about that transition and the retirement time frame there. And then last comment is to recognise that under the law, this is a recreation reserve under the Reserves Act, so we must, while often our conversation is around restoration or grazing or climate, we must remember that statutorily the primary purpose here is to enable the residents of our 4 big cities that sit around this park to enjoy their big backyard, and to make sure that recreation is thoroughly part of the plans, and indeed with our efforts to connect people to nature, recreation is actually restoration, because the more people who recreate get involved in restoration, restoration attracts recreation. So it's a synergy. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nash.
Oh yeah, I was just going to add some little minor things to 4 and 5, but they've been added now. But just to say, I think this is good, and I was really happy to have the community, as others have said. I think it's good to be able to respond to that in our meeting with those 2 amendments and, well, not amendments, but additional recommendations. And I think if we can find places where it's a win-win, where actually we find upon reflection and with a bit more study, we can retire stuff quicker without risking weeds, pests, and other problems, then it's great. We're not saying that's absolutely got to happen, but if it can happen, then it's a win-win for everybody. So I think it's good to be able to reflect that in our recommendations. Thank you.
I think so. Everybody's spoken who'd like to. So in that case, I will put the recommendations all together, 1 through to 5. Is that okay with everybody? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The motions are carried. Excellent. Bravo. I just want to, we're going to break for morning tea, but I just want to say in closing, thank you to the public that came along and spoke to that. And I also want to acknowledge that you can see that online we have a lot of our staff, they're in the room, people who, it was really good that you were here today to listen to the debate and particularly listening to the questions and particularly listening to our community who've made the effort to come along. And my sense is we ultimately all have the same vision, and that is to do better by our environment. So thank you very much for the work. So great. That's it's too early to pop the champagne this morning. We'll have a celebration cup of tea now though, but we'll only have 10 minutes because we actually did spend quite a lot of time on that item, and so 25 past sharp, the chair will be resuming. Thank you. Okay, we're going to resume our agenda and wait for a couple who are tardy. So welcome back everybody. So on to item number 6, and Jack and Jackie. Stop messing with me. Welcome.
I have been told, I have had a complaint about not speaking loud enough in relation to this very issue, which is someone who's been told he's too loud his whole life, was immensely gratifying. So again, I'll take being directed to use the microphone as a lesson that I can listen to feedback. Moving on to more serious matters, I'll take the papers read through, Madam Chair, but given that a number of councillors may be new to this issue, I'll just take us through some highlights. So Pinehaven, as many are aware, is a beautiful suburb in Upper Hutt with a stream running through the middle of it. The administration of that stream is split between Upper Hutt City Council and Greater Wellington. In the early teens, we worked with Upper Hutt City Council to develop a flood management plan before my time, but some around council may remember this. That was signed off and approved in 2016. It anticipated a range of works, including plan changes and structural works within the stream. The original forecast for that implementation of that plan was $10.9 million, and that would allow for a 1 in 25 year level of keeping the river in the channel and protecting not quite 50 houses from a 1 in 100 year event. We signed up to an MOU with Upper Hutt City Council with a joint steering group and with Te Awa Kairangi Hutt Valley Subcommittee as the governing body, with delivery by Upper Hutt City Council via Wellington Water. Fast forward to now, we have 2 out of an anticipated 5 phases complete. That involves 2 major culvert works, as well as Willow Park in-stream work, and 3 phases to go. However, the costs of this work are now sitting at an estimate of 58 to 60 million, and that estimate's over a year old, so may well be more than that now, with roughly $37 million still to spend. We have a 50-50 funding agreement split with Upper Hutt City Council, on the understanding that at the completion of works, they will take over management of the whole of the stream and we will exit. But in their long-term plan, they've only allocated just over $6.5 million worth of funding, of which 50% is an income from us. So while we've allocated in our long-term plan sufficient funding to complete the overall program at that estimate, they have not. They only have $3.25 million to put into it. Through a meeting with Wellington Water last year, the project was paused. Wellington Water has stood back from the delivery of it, and we are now proposing via the 2 councils 3 options to test. One of those is to carry on with the existing flood management plan at that cost. The option which we're recommending, which is to actually do a redesign of our structural intervention within the stream, and then option 3, which would be to stop or defer. The redesign, we believe that through a careful redesign, we could deliver the same level of protection for a significantly reduced cost, and also through, in doing so, give more effect to Te Mano Te Wai and have a more naturalised stream channel rather than a sort of vertical stream wall concrete block type approach. The approach we're taking in terms of decision making, this paper has already been to Te Awa Kairangi Hutt Valley Subcommittee. They have endorsed it through to the respective home councils. Today we're seeking a recommendation from Environment Committee through to Council to provide the final approval. It's just based on advice from Democratic Services around who initially approved the flood management plan and making sure that our processes are very robust. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Staples.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions, please. Who did the original estimate? Was it Wellington Water? Because there's been a lot of questions around their figures over recent months with regards to their budgeting, etc. So I'd be quite interested to know, are we happy that it is actually still a true estimate, or do we need to revisit that? My second question is if we change it, what public consultation will be required? Because I do remember it was quite fraught at the time, and there was one particular local who wasn't very happy about any of it, and is some of what he was saying, could that have been correct? Or I'm interested in the risk of reopening the whole conversation again, and it was particularly difficult, I remember, for the Upper Hutt councillor, both of them. So yes, those are my questions.
Do you know who did the original?
No.
So I can't answer who had the original estimate, but I can say we've looked into Wellington Water's estimates and we think by and large they are correct. The works to date cost significantly more, and that was in many cases for quite reasonable things. For instance, the replacement of the culverts, they needed considerable strengthening to allow for the weight of electric buses, which are heavier. Construction costs that have increased substantially, particularly through COVID, etc. So we think that they are, broadly speaking, reasonable, but we want to go back and see if we're taking a different approach, we can screw them down. In terms of the second, Upper Hutt are leading the development of a communications plan. The chair of the Te Awa Karangi Hutt Valley Subcommittee is the spokesperson for the project. We think that a targeted consultation is the most appropriate, specifically those homeowners who are directly affected by the plan, and then like a drop-in session for the wider community to come and understand about it. There'll be a mailer or an email out to members of the Pinehaven community specifically, but it has been consulted at a financial level as well through our respective long-term plans, but quite a targeted consultation because we're not proposing to do a major overhaul of the FMP, but rather a redesign of a specific subcomponent of it.
Okay, any more questions? Councillor Wolf.
Yeah, just to clarify, it's us that are doing the redesign?
It'll be a consultant that'll be working directly to a steering group. I'm a representative on that, as is Tim Harty, who's a general manager at Upper Hutt City Council, and that's reporting through to Te Awa Karangi. The proposal is this is just to approve us taking that step, so stopping the current works formally and doing the redesign. And then once we have those options, that will come back for a further decision to say, yes, please proceed with option ABC.
Yeah,
Right, Councillor Duthie, I'll just inform those who are just arriving that we're on item number 6 at question time. Thank you.
Thanks. Is part of the assessment of options, could it be that we relook at property acquisition to give the river more room to move, or remove the asset that's at risk rather than building defences for an asset if there's the value is not worth it?
Yes, potentially, and that comes down as well to that. The cost benefit is a critical factor. If there's 30 some houses still to protect at a cost of 37 million, there's a question of actually what is the cost benefit? Is it a bit more affordable for the community to purchase those houses outright and remove the hazard? So that will be something that's considered.
Councillor Wolf, follow.
Yeah, just one question in relation to how often is it predicted to flood that area currently? Is there any sort of stats as to, we're spending a lot of money on 30 houses?
Yeah, there is. It floods every few years. Probably the best way to answer that is to say the works are designed so that roughly every 25 years the stream won't leap out of the channel and flood people's properties, and roughly every 100 years the stream won't actually flood into people's houses and damage the houses themselves. Now, as we know though, that's giving best estimates around climate change and so forth, but we do see 1 in 100 year floods more than once every 100 years. So.
Right, thank you. I'll call for a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Connolly. Was hoping you would be the mover, and Councillor Duthie is the seconder. Would you like to speak to the motions?
Yeah, just to say that this has been a fraught process, and it's unfortunate that we are in the position of having not been able to complete the works as planned. But unfortunately, the costs no longer suggest that our current pathway is the right pathway to be on. So we need to relook at it. And also, I guess, when these options were originally proposed, it was 2016. So that was quite a long time ago. That was pre the Whai Tour. It was pre quite a bit of our thinking around how best to manage flood risks in terms of adopting more natural solutions. So the fact that we are pausing this now, whilst it is unfortunate, and there are a number of houses that still remain at flood risk whilst we review this, it does give us a chance to relook at the way we're managing the flood risk in the Pinehaven community. So hopefully we will be able to come up with something that meets our objectives in terms of the floodplain management plan and delivers for less cost, but also meets our environmental objectives of how to manage floodwaters into the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Duffy? No? Okay. Anybody else want to contribute? In that case, I'll take the vote. So all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, the motions are carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, team. Right, item number 7, page 49. Who have we got presenting? Hello. Hi, Francie. So, of course, we'll take it as read. Is there anything you want to say by way of update, introduction?
E kura tātou, ko Francie Morrow tōku ingoa, Team Leader Knowledge Water Resilience, and I've also got Ella Boehm here, who's our Senior Project Manager. If it's okay, Madam Chair, I will just highlight a couple of key points. So yes, we're presenting the flood hazard maps for the Waipoa River, the Mangatare Stream and the Waifetu Stream with this paper. These maps have been developed in accordance with Greater Wellington's flood hazard modelling standard. They've been through our full process, including being independently audited, and have been confirmed as fit for purpose. As per our standard, the community engagement was undertaken at various stages for these maps. We've also developed flood hazard overlays, excuse me, which are included as your attachments, which have been provided to the various district councils and local authorities for inclusion in their district plans. So yes, we're seeking endorsement of these maps from the Environment Committee. Both have been recommended to the Environment Committee from either the Te Awa Kairangi Subcommittee or the Wairarapa Committee as appropriate.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So any questions? Right. Yes, Councillor Nash has one.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I don't feel capable of really assessing the validity of these things personally. I'm just being honest. It's super technical. It's high-powered engineering work. I trust it instinctively, but I guess I just want to say, I mean, is this the best way of like, what is the council's? What do we actually? I mean, I know I can see what we're agreeing to. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just sort of saying this is super technical stuff. Am I supposed to understand it more than I actually do before voting on it?
No, we all understand it.
Yeah,
I think it's awkward. Okay, we're pulling his leg. So, Councillor Saw, is that you got a comment to that? No. Oh, you got or a confession? I was going to comment to that. Councillor Conley.
So I was just going to say I can't speak for the Waipoa or the Mangatare, but I can speak to the Waifetu, as that has been the process of those flood maps has been managed through the Te Awa Kairangi Committee. Yeah. And again, the actual content of those flood maps requires an engineering degree that I don't have. But I can speak to the process whereby there was community engagement, there's been external audits, and we've had quite a lot of, we had members of the community talk about how they would like to be engaged. We took their feedback on board. We engaged with mana whenua around their specific issues as to how we'd approach this. We need to do better next time. So yeah, in terms of Waifetu, we've definitely met all the requirements in terms of that process perspective, and I can give you that assurance.
And Madam Chair, if I could just say from the Waipoa and the Mangatare, it has been an exhaustive process. That's why both our staff members here have started to get little grey hairs.
No, they don't. Okay. Anybody else want to ask a really relevant question?
There. Hi, I just wanted to pick up the audit findings on Waifetu and just the note about community engagement, noticeably lighter, and was wondering whether this was something that Greater Wellington or whoever is involved needs to develop further processes or improve community engagement. Just wanted to know what the learning or the forward action is from that.
Definitely. Thank you for the question. We do have several stages in the flood hazard modelling standard where community engagement is a requirement, which is what the independent auditor has picked up. Personally, I felt that comment was a little unfair from the auditor, but because they're independent, I can't speak to that. Just, I guess, to reassure you with the Waifetu, we did do quite extensive community engagement through particularly one period. He may be picking up that we could have done an earlier piece of engagement as well, but the piece that we did do, we went out to train stations, we went out to various community groups, including the Friends of the Waifetu Stream, we talked to mana whenua, we went to community markets in several places, and we did pick up a lot, as Councillor Connolly was saying, that were requested through the Te Awa Kairangi from community members. So whilst it says it's light in comparison, actually there was still some quite extensive engagement that was undertaken.
So they might have, but their criteria of how to assess community engagement might have been what triggered that comment. I'm curious to know whether in that community engagement, how you might use Enviro schools, or in a community like that where there are a lot of schools and ECEs and so forth. How does that work in the community engagement?
Yeah, great question. It's not one that we have directly looked into. The purpose of our engagement for flood hazard mapping and modelling is making people aware of their flood risk. It's seeking feedback on what the maps themselves are presenting in terms of where the flood risk is and whether that's representative of existing flooding. That's not to say that it wouldn't be a great idea to get, our children or younger children involved. And just, I guess, one point on that, I did have very specifically school child, probably 10 years old, come up to me at one of their markets and had a great conversation about what was on the mapping. He was very educated on the matter. He's obviously looked into it. So there is definitely interest from school children there as well, but it's not something that we've currently explored.
Could I make a suggestion that maybe that sort of a future community engagement like this, that we do look at involving Enviro schools, or however we might do it, because I know that they are starting to work on trying to build that form of community engagement with our younger members of our community.
Sorry, Councillor Duthie and then Councillor Nash.
Thank you. Maybe we could refer the 10-year-old to Councillor Nash. Bit of a 101 session. One of the other things highlighted by the audit report and was discussed at the Te Awa Kairangi subcommittee is the particular complexity of Waifetu Stream, where you've got the stream flooding and the stormwater flooding, and then you've got the Hutt River next to it, which floods and backs up the Waifetu Stream, and then you've got the harbour and sea level rise. Terribly complicated to model all of that, but the auditor did point out that the sea level rise aspect of that was based on a very old Wellington Harbour specific assessment, somewhat dated, maybe the 90s. So what are we aware of? Are we doing, or is someone doing work on updating sea level rise and coastal flooding sort of impacts for when we're doing these coastal interacting stream flood modelling?
Yeah, I don't recall the exact comment in the audit. However, what I can reassure you is that the sea level rise component was used. Was the latest information on the Sea Rise website, which MFE put out only a year or two ago. Actually, it was put out whilst we were in the middle of the process of developing those flood hazard maps, and so we did update the flood hazard. The sea level rise estimates as we were going through the process. So the ones that are included in the final maps have the latest information that's available. And yeah, I think we are just take information as it comes available. These processes do take several years to complete. I think you can see in here, they basically all started back in 2019 or were established, so which is a particularly long time. Some of that's due to working with community, some of it for the Waifetu Stream was because we're also working with Wellington Water, so they were a little bit longer than we would expect. But that over that time, some of the information does change, and so we take the information as it's available. At some point, we do have to draw a line in the sand and say that's information that was available at that time. But I guess just a reassurance that the latest information for sea level rise was used in this mapping.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Nash.
Yes, thank you. I think, to me, we don't need to do this now or today with this paper, but I think it would be easier for me to feel comfortable with endorsing it recognising the fact that I'm not a flood engineer and I don't actually know the entire process, even having read the paper, I guess if we could note, there could be a noting recommendation to say, note the process for reaching this point that acts as a basis for us to endorse it. Because you're just sort of saying, yeah, I endorse it, which is fine, and I'm happy to do that. Again, not trying to be difficult, but I feel like if there were a recommendation that said, yeah, we note that this has followed the processes that Councillor Staples and Councillor Connolly have sort of laid out of public consultation, working with the community over a number of years, and that it's followed, external order, that it's gone through a committee in the case of the Waifetu one, that then for anybody reading the decision we've made and for us making it, we can see that there was this kind of basis for it.
How about we add that in today?
Yeah, we could. I mean,
we could do that.
Yeah.
We just need some wording.
Yeah. I'll write something.
Can you write?
I can write something.
You know, when you're an engineer and you're...
Maybe Councillor Duthie's got something.
Oh, I didn't mean like that. Yeah.
So, Chair, I think that's what the first recommendation is trying to do, but perhaps what is not clear is that flood modelling standard actually does include a methodology for all those things that Councillor Nash has just listed.
The first one.
No.
So perhaps some councillor...
So, in accordance with the standard makes it sound like just a technical standard, but
Yes.
it's actually a methodology for public consultation, for governance approval along the way.
So we can just
all
add
that.
some wording to that. What do you think?
Not that I've ever
I'll be
read it.
good. I think it's in the paragraph 4, I suppose, that we could, and 5, and just, yeah.
So just that...
Or maybe just as is.
That rest of that sentence, the first sentence of paragraph 4. How about that? Okay, so how about we have a crack at reading it out loud while they type it up, or cut and paste probably from the paper. Notes that the flood hazard maps have been developed in accordance with Greater Wellington's flood hazard modelling standard. Which is the process carried out by Greater Wellington Regional Council to understand flood risk, significant water courses in the Wellington region. Would that cover it?
I think it
How about that? That covers it for today, and then for future papers, just a recognition from the writers of future papers that I think that's always really good. I always like to have an approach. I agree that anybody picking up and looking at if they only saw the recommendations, they would understand more from us. So let's in the meantime get a mover and a seconder. Councillor Staples move, Councillor Saul second. Any debate on the mover's seconder or anybody else? No. Yes, Councillor
I'd like
Duffy.
to say one thing, and it's more to do with now that we have this modelling, what happens next, because in terms of the Waifetu stream in particular, what it shows is over time a very, very stark effect on the suburbs that are close to the harbour. And that's not just Seaview or Petone, which we think of, but it's actually in behind there, the Moira and Waifetu itself, and more extensive. And so it's really, really important that we as a council keep the pressure on those who actually make the planning rules and the strategies for coastal adaptation, for managed retreat, even if it's not a popular word right now, because that's what the modelling shows will be the impacts down the track. So the sooner we go on to thinking and applying the value of this modelling, the better. So it is good to see that these have been passed through to the district planning processes and that is in train in some form, and no doubt will be a topic of discussion in the hearings for those district plans as to whether it's got it right or not.
Great, thank you very much. So in that case, I will put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, the motions are carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you. Right, item number 8. Oh, hello. And we should take it as read, of course. But is there anything else you want to add, Francie?
Yes, if you don't mind, Madam Chair. Thank you. So yes, this is also our paper. This one specifically relating to the Waipoua River that runs through Masterton and the flood hazard that we've just talked about. And now this is the what are we going to do about it part of that. So Greater Wellington has been working for the last 6.5 years with members of the community, Marsden District Council and Mana Whenua to develop this response for the Waipoua Urban Reach as part of the Te Kauru Aparua Mahanga Floodplain Management Plan. The preferred option was developed using extensive optioneering processes, including community engagement, where we took 4 different options to the community, and a significant multi-criteria analysis process. The preferred option, which is in front of you now, includes a combination of structural measures, nature-based solutions, non-structural responses, and is the outcome of all of our community engagement. Good. The preferred option that we're seeking endorsement of includes upgrading the majority of our stop banks through the urban reach, including extending them for continuous defence. Include some increased channel capacity, particularly around the bridges, nature-based solutions, planning controls, which we've just spoken about as well, and emergency management and flood warning improvements. So we're currently seeking endorsement of this preferred flood risk management option, and specifically relating to progressing to the detailed design for this. The endorsement that we're requesting does not relate to the financial commitment to implement the preferred option, and that will be required to go through our long-term plan funding. So we're just seeking that endorsement to progress to the next stages of detailed design.
Excellent, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I missed the Aparua Mahanga Management Committee meeting that discussed this, but looked a bit into it subsequently. I understand one of the points of discussion at that meeting was around what the nature-based stuff up in the catchment actually means and how does it affect landowners further up the catchment. So that's part of our solution package that's still being worked on, but could you give us a flavour of what is likely to be or what is possible in terms of the restraining floodwaters in the upper catchment through nature-based solutions? What does that mean beyond the slogan?
Sure, I'll speak to that if that's okay, Madam Chair, and may also ask Ella to respond to that question. So at the moment, it's been included in the option as something to continue to investigate. We do have a project underway at the moment, actually due for completion next month, with the Ministry for the Environment, where they've funded investigations into the feasibility of nature-based solutions for this particular catchment. So that is underway. So at the moment, this recommendation is to continue to investigate and implement where appropriate as additional resiliency to the other works that we're proposing. As to the specific nature of those nature-based solutions and what we're investigating, that's what I'll let Ella speak to.
Morning, everyone. So with the nature-based solutions, it is part of our strategic direction. I think the main part of what the Waipoua project team wanted to recognise is that it is a really important part of the solution in the long term, even though it doesn't exactly, have an implementation plan at the moment. The MFE study that we're currently doing and finishing is looking at 4 different specific types, which is about different types of leaky storage, or so different small bunds or leaky dams or wetlands to keep some of that flood water upstream and delay the peak. Looking at giving the river more room, improving the riparian margins, re-engaging the floodplain, which would be to re-engage some of the old oxbows and potentially lower some of the burbs and give them more room for floodwater. And the last is about afforestation over large parts of the catchment. I think there is a strong recognition both from, that study and the community, which came through in our community engagement, that it's likely that nature-based solutions will be a lot of small projects, and so it might be hundreds of small projects that landowners will like to do on their own property, and putting this into the solution and along with the MFE study, which all the councils in the country are doing, is going to just provide a bit more information to have a bit more of a plan, so that when someone wants to implement something, they actually have a guide about what it might mean. Hopefully that answers your question.
Great, thank you, Ella. That's great. Councillor Nash?
Thanks. Just thinking same point as the previous one, whether we could note the process here as a basis for endorsing this.
Yes, do you have wording?
Well, I don't know what the process was. I mean, I kind of do, but reading the paper, but there seems to have been quite a lot of paragraph 17 talk about community engagement, and obviously there's analysis. So you could just say no, that the preferred option has been subject to robust process of community engagement and analysis.
That's good. Let them capture that. So let's look. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. Is that Councillor Staples, Councillor Duthie, second? Would you like to speak to it? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to speak to this because it has been a long time coming, and many of the councillors here now wouldn't be party to the fact that the Tika Uru, the Upper Ruamahanga Flood Management Plan, started way back 9 years ago, and there's been an enormous amount of work done on flood protection and nature-based solutions, possible nature-based solutions for Tika Uru. However, the part of the Waipua that went through Masterton, unfortunately, we made a couple of mistakes and the community did not feel comfortable with our recommendations. And at the same time, we were doing Wahine, which was a community-led process, and some of the Masterton people said we want a similar process. So we signed off Tika Uru and we went back to square one for the Waipua urban reach. And so I'm very comfortable with the community engagement and the work that has been done by our officers and by external experts that we have called in to get us to a position where the majority are comfortable with what is being recommended. There are some people that believe that we shouldn't be doing any, I'll call it hard engineering, that we should be totally looking at nature-based solutions. But would we consider doing that for the hut, for Te Awa Kairangi, Riverlink? No. We have a town here now, a large urban development for Wairarapa, and we would not be walking away from hard engineering for the likes of Hutt City. So I don't believe that it's the right thing to do for Masterton. There is still a small amount of disagreement about exactly where we should let the water go, but there will always be some people that want it here and not there, and vice versa. And no doubt, as we get to the next stage, when we're actually designing the project, some people will be sad to lose some trees, because we will lose some trees as we give the river more room to move. But I feel very comfortable supporting this. I'm asking my fellow councillors to support it, and I'm also saying thank you to the team that has got us this far.
Excellent. Anybody else want to speak? No. Councillor Lee?
Well, thank you. Just thank you, Madam Chair. Just comment. This is all really good work. It is a long journey, and I think as responsible local authorities, we do have to look at flood risk identification and management, but we also need to be mindful that there's a human element, because personally I had involvement with a close friend who had property in one of these identified areas, and they're more than just lines and contours on maps. So as a landowner affected by a line or a contour, people get really emotional. Why? Because it's money, it's property values. But without triggering a conflict of interest, I did help this person about what the necessity of having these contours. But I think they're in a better position because they sold their property. But that's the human side of having lines and contours on maps, because it does affect people and they get very emotional. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see, Nigel, you want to say something?
Oh, look, just briefly, I did want to recognise the comments that Councillor Staples made, but also acknowledge the team.
as we go through these issues around flood mapping, which have been around for a very long time, one thing that is a prerequisite, which goes to the point that Councillor Duffy was making, how do you actually respond to the information? And one of the most critical partnerships is in fact between the two regulatory authorities, which is the District Council or City Council and the Regional Council. I think the team in this case have done an excellent job at resetting that relationship in conjunction with the cooperative Master and District Council to actually get these things over the line, and there is more work to do, but that is the answer to getting good quality flood mapping and getting good quality buy-in from the communities and responding to the information once it's been in play. So I just wanted to kind of A, note that because it's a feature of the last two papers, but B, acknowledge it. In this case, it's done very, very well.
Thank you. Councillor Nash.
Just to capture that point that I was making, if we could say process of community engagement and scientific analysis. That was, yeah, thanks. Good.
Excellent. So everybody can see these two recommendations up on the screen because we've got a new one. So just to make sure you all know what we're voting on, I will put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, the motions are carried. Great. Thank you, Ella, and thank you, Francie. That's great. Thank you very much. So we're going to move now to the item number 9, Farming Reference Group. Is it right?
Yes.
Yes. I see my papers here, back to there. So Farming Reference Group report, Barbie is an apology today, and she has her written report there. I want to draw your attention, so we'll take that as read. I want to draw your attention to the bottom of the first page where it says resolution. So at the last Farming Reference Group that Adrian and I attend, we had quite the discussion and around Canada geese, and the Farming Reference Group wanted a resolution or to come forward to this committee. So I'm wondering if perhaps Adrian, you might want to move it. And I'll, yeah. Oh yes. Yep.
So just on the grazing emissions section of the report from the Farming Reference Group, I just wondered what it means to say where it says if they continue to eliminate livestock from any of their land to supposedly offset urban emissions. I just wondered what supposedly offset means. Is it? I didn't understand what it meant. Does it mean that, is it calling into question the idea that stopping grazing offsets urban emissions, or is it saying, I don't understand? So if there could be some clarification on what the supposedly means.
Farmers.
The context for that paper at the Farming Reference Group was to discuss through the options that were presented at Climate Committee. So I think the word supposedly might be the fact that none of the options were exactly agreed to, and I think there's further work for us to do to develop those options. The reference group received the report as a report that was exploring options for how we're thinking about meeting our emissions reductions targets for GW. So some of those options were listed and discussed through with the Farming Reference Group. So yeah, I think the word supposedly probably alludes to the fact that it's not a definite yet, and there are options that have been worked through.
Okay, because it seems to be saying that it seems to be making a kind of judgment about council's rationale for eliminating livestock from their land by saying that council's rationale for eliminating livestock from any of their land is to supposedly offset urban emissions. I think, yeah, I think maybe my feedback is when we get these reports, just making sure that they're crystal clear and that value judgments are, if there are value judgments in there, then they're sort of clearly referenced as value judgments rather than noted in it. I think this is unclear and potentially leaves quite a lot of room for misinterpretation. I mean, I interpreted it in a different way to what Fatima interpreted it as. So, yeah. Anyway.
Just noting, normally Barbie would be here, so that it would be easier. This one time we kind of question it, so we can perhaps more informally do the check-in with Barbie about that. Cool. Any other questions about this paper? In which case, can I go back to the resolution there?
You're just framing it up as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's worded there as a resolution, and Councillor Staples, will you move that?
Yes.
And I will second that.
Yes, happy to.
Do you want to speak to it?
Just quickly, I guess we all know Canada geese are a problem, and they're a problem recreationally for some of, like Kapiti, for instance, but they're a huge problem economically in Wairarapa for landowners that are in the vicinity of Wairarapa Moana. And doing something about them is beyond the, not the capabilities, but I guess, well, yes, the ability of landowners individually. And they're asking for a coordinated approach. They totally understand that our pest control budget and abilities are limited, and they're asking, I guess what they're saying is they support us asking for a bigger picture approach with government, because it needs a national approach to actually make a difference.
And I just add to that as the seconder that staff at the Farming Reference Group meeting supported this approach. And I just give reference that, for example, at Queen Elizabeth Park, when I was there on Tuesday catching up with staff, that they were giving me an update that they are, shooting Canada geese. So we do that as good land managers on areas that we're working, but more needs to be done. Okay, so that's my spooge. Anybody else want to speak to the motions? Okay, well, Councillor Duffy.
Just a quick question. So I completely agree, and but the letter is writing to MPI to seek to classify Canada geese as a national pest animal. I'm just not sure how that changes things, because it's already classified as a pest animal in our regional. I just looked it up, and it's here. It's in the list of harmful organisms in Appendix 2. So what does MPI classifying it as a national pest? How does that change their management regionally?
I think the discussion really about classifying it through MPI was the fact that it needs regional coordination across regions to really think about how we target Canada geese as they fly. So just because the cull happened in Wairarapa, the idea is then they just fly over to another place to nest in molts. So the idea was, there needs a bit of a national coordinated approach for how we tackle them as a pest.
Cool. Okay, in that case, I'll put the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, the motion is carried. Thank you very much. Okay, item number 10. Hello. So we'll take the paper as read. Anything you want to add, Nicola, ahead of any questions?
No, I just wanted to say we're continuing on our journey of trying to lift up the level of reporting, and that the next report in 6 months' time will still involve some more detailed aspects, because we want to keep navigating that balance between there are a lot of specific recommendations that people are interested in, and you also want a broader picture of how are we implementing it in a more holistic way and drawing it together. So this report is at that higher level. The next one will have a bit more detail appended to it as well. So yeah, happy for any questions.
Okay. Councillor Connolly.
Just one really practical question. The report talks about the Waifatu Integrated Catchment Project, which is something that I'm very excited about, and also feel a level of responsibility towards, because that was one of the main things that came out of our Waifatu flood management, flood mapping work, was issues around the focus on the Waifatu marae and the burial site and areas of housing, all for the local mana whenua. You mentioned a meeting in May. I understand we're planning towards a bigger hui. Have we got that locked in? When can we expect that to be? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I haven't got Tim available to answer the specifics on that. I know there've been a number of informal meetings, but I can come back to you on the specific Waitāhui. I think it's probably also worth saying that the challenges in Waifatu are really complex, and that the work we're doing is gaining some really awesome momentum for how we collaborate, but we're still some steps away from how we would envisage a multi-year solution laying out. So yeah, it's awesome to have that support from Taranaki Whanui and Hutt City Council, but it's going to be a longer time frame overall.
Councillor Nash.
Thank you for this, Nicola. Just paragraph 5, just talking about where we, Greater Wellington, can best influence, the deliverables of the WIP. And I guess, you're saying, yep, it's around regulatory gaps and so on. But I do want, and then you go on to say that it's essentially infrastructure for Three Waters is the main driver of improving stream quality in, like, say, Wellington. I wonder whether, and obviously that's territorial authorities working with Wellington Water at the moment. I just wonder whether there's a role for us in highlighting which, let's say, sewer outfalls or constructed overflows specifically are causing damage to specific streams in specific places. Like there was one recently identified in Wharewhara. There could be a number of others that are particularly egregious that we could be, in terms of our role as an environmental protection agency, identifying and saying, hey, if we fix this one, you'd get this benefit in terms of improved health of that particular stream or ecosystem. Is that something that we could do? I'm also thinking, in terms of like the national direction and everything changing and our role potentially changing, that feels like a practical thing that we can do that relates directly to our goal of protecting the environment and fresh water.
Yeah, I'm just looking over at my colleague Fatima because I think that specific question sits more in her path, but I do think that you've got the message right, that there is a particular lever in urban environments that's a bit different to non-urban, but maybe Fatima can help answer that.
In regards to Seaview particularly, we've got they've got a Ropu, Seaview Ropu, that Tim, we are an observer because of our regulatory role and not being involved in details, but the idea is about Wellington Water connecting alongside its shareholder councils with Ngāti Taua and Taranaki Whanui to look at approaches like that, particularly to support them in their future consenting requirements as well. So I think it's sort of making progress in that space.
Councillor Duffy?
So actually helpful comment on that, I hope, Councillor Nash. Fatima's just referred to the treatment plant and the overflows there, and I had the same question the other day and I went for a look, and on the Wellington Water website they now report network overflows, and that was a whaitoa recommendation. So you can go there and it's got Hutt City Council, Porirua, and it tells you that just last month there were 14 raw sewage overflows into Black Creek, Wanuiamata in 1 month, which is more than the number of wet days. So I'm not quite sure what was going on, but so maybe one of our roles is actually to highlight some of this, to show this is how often. There were 16 in Wellington City Council last month, and it's got the streams that were listed.
And I guess I'm thinking, like, because if we did that, one thing is highlighting the things that are happening, and the other is to say, how would you stop it? What would it cost? What would if you wanted to stop those 14 overflows, network overflows into Black Creek and Wanuiamata, what would you actually need to do? And presumably the answer is some infrastructure that is expensive to build. And at least if it's a bit like building lifts and making our stations accessible. We can't do it. We know we need to do it and want to do it in the future. We know we can't do it all now, but at least if we have a clear picture of what it's having stuff on the shelf ready to be funded for a situation where the funding might become available for whatever reason, I think is really, really important role for us.
Yeah, look, let me take that general message away to see whether in our next report we can have some sort of section, particularly around urban overflows.
Okay. Oh, Councillor Saul.
Just picking up on that theme, and I guess one that we've circled around a bit in terms of what our responsibility is. I feel like some of this information is incredibly consequential to the future plan that our new water services entity has. So my question would be about how this work is going to inform that, because it does have quite a material bearing on the sequencing and prioritising of their work. And given that the foundational documents of that organisation are currently being developed, I think this kind of information and that reporting that Councillor Duthie has pointed out is quite significant and important. And so I'd like to know how this is going to inform that work that we're doing.
Yeah, I've and Nigel, if you want to chip in, feel free. I've been discussing with Matt Hickman, who's leading the support for that, and he has it down as areas of recommendation to put forward for this council to endorse, and then it goes forward to the partner councils to further take it forward. So there are a couple of steps in it, but it's absolutely the officer's intent to weave Whaitua recommendations and commitments and similar holistic work into the foundational documents of the new water services entity.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And obviously next Thursday as well, the council's considering the paper on our decision as to the new entity, and that's an excellent place to have another additional conversation about those elements.
Great, thank you very much. So I think that's all the questions. Thank you very much, Nicola. I'm presuming you're doing the next item as well. So item number 11 on the Whaitua update for Wairarapa Coast.
I am, with the support of Tash Stiles online, our Wairarapa Coast catchment manager. In fact, I'll hand over to her to make a brief opening comment.
Kia ora, everyone. Yes, I just will take the paper as read, but I just wanted to highlight some sort of key updates, really, that we are progressing the Wairarapa Coast Whaitua. It is very much around that non-regulatory part. We're just continuing our discussions with our mana whenua partners on design and sort of what that looks like, but we are doing lots of collaboration with our catchment community groups, and really this Whaitua is about thinking about how that implementation looks like on the ground. How do we engage with communities? How do we understand our values? And we think about the actions that are connected to outcomes. And we're thinking quite broad with our outcomes. So not just for water quality, but pest management, wider community resilience, and all of that other good stuff amongst it. That is all part of these catchment action plans. And the idea is not to create plans on top of plans. It's about how do these plans connect to each other. It just depends on what scales that you're looking at it within the landscape. But welcome any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? No, we're all good. Thank you. Thanks for coming online for that, Tasha. That's really cool. So, excellent. Thank you, Nicola. And now I'll move to the last item. So Leanne will be talking to this. So taking it as read, of course, from everybody.
Yes, kia ora. I'm aware that we're kind of running out of time, so very happy to take this item as read as per normal, and happy to take any comments or questions.
Yes. Given there's no recommendations, but comments are welcome. Certainly a thanks and appreciation from me. That's really good paper yet again. So any questions, anybody? Is anybody brewing one?
It's Paris 69, Greater Wellington and Predator-Free Wellington coordinating response to the DOC Predator-Free 2050 discussion document. I wondered whether we would see that before it went, or be able to have some input into it.
Yes, I'm sure I could share that. Can I also, through you, Madam Chair, just be sneaky and draw to Council's attention the advertising campaign that was launched last night? You will see our native birds start disappearing from the logos of a number of major New Zealand companies to draw attention to their plight. So I don't know if this is appropriate, but draw attention to it would be welcome.
Extremely appropriate. Councillor Staples.
Thank you. paragraph 28, the Ruamahanga, it talks about Taumata Arawai's wastewater standards as currently proposed would not apply to this due to the low dilution ratio. Now, I'm sorry to appear thick here, but does this mean that there's low poo to high water or high poo to low water?
It will be the latter.
Thank you.
Thank you, as ever, raising the standard of debate. It's clarification. Nigel, you're hovering
look,
you look like you've got something to say.
No, predator-free. Wellington. Just, I mean, I'm sure you've all seen, but just to recognise that with the Supreme Award winner at the Taitotora Local Government Awards last week. Obviously, huge achievement for Wellington City Council and also Greater Wellington Regional Council, because we have a huge role, and you all have all supported that for a long period of time. So there's been a lot of fantastic publicity. It's great for the predator-free movement. Absolutely outstanding for predator-free Wellington. And something I think we should all feel super proud of. So just wanted to acknowledge that as well, Chair.
Does that prize come with any money? Glory. Just glory. Just
exposure. Stand for exposure.
Like most things, just glory. Is it appropriate? Sorry, Jack, you were going to say something?
I was only just going to add, I was up at Predator Free Wellington this morning where they had a bit of a celebratory barbecue, and some of the Wellington City Councillors will be going along to a community event in Miramar shortly to help celebrate it. And I could get that invite extended to Greater Wellington Councillors if you'd like.
Sounds great. Councillor was yours about that, Councillor Staples? Councillor Staples and then Duffy.
It's just some of the communications that came out about that talked about Wellington City Council and how wonderful they were, and it really didn't say a lot about Wellington Regional Council. And I remember we had some pretty robust debate about putting the amount of money that we have done and are doing over the 5 years. It was in the millions, and so I'd just like to see a little bit more recognition for our organisation around this. I think we've probably done just as much, if not more, than our sister organisation down the road.
Yeah, look, that's a fair comment, Councillor, and I think we've been reflecting with Wellington City how that might have been a approach that was slightly more integrated than maybe it was in terms of not only nominating Predator Free Wellington for the award, but actually how we celebrated that together more fulsomely. So it's a conversation we have at play, and we're working really hard now, obviously, to make sure that both Greater Wellington and Wellington City get the credit they deserve for the mahi they've delivered. But it was probably it could have been done a little bit differently to make sure what you just raised happened. And I can assure you that it's a perspective we as staff also agree with.
Well put. Bravo. Lovely. So any other questions or comments about this report? Councillor Cook-Burnand, we're just on the last item. Oh. No, really. Councillor Duffy, sorry.
Thank you. Jack, question around the ungulate project in Wainuiomata. So we've got a draft plan sort of in its final stages. Give us paint a little picture of what is this work going to look like and what are we going to see in a year's time?
I'll confess I've not yet read the draft plan. I got to that it was over 100 pages and included details of staff morale and things. I've pushed it out to my holiday reading. But it does outline effectively creating a deer-proof fence around the boundary of the water collection area, utilising our existing weirs to cross the rivers. We've had discussions with DOC about an MOU which would enable us to do give and take across ours and their land, although we'd pay for it. The fence being designed in such a way that it can go along the surface of the ground, thus not having to cut through roots, but not allowing pigs in, with some squares cut out at the advice of the Remataka Forest Park Trust to allow kiwis to go back and forth. Then very, very intense ground control, possibly supplemented by aerial control of all the ungulates that are in there. DOC are making some noise around being able to support with buffer control, particularly around the Turiri biodiversity hotspot within the forest park. So they're in agreement with the overall vision and direction. will support us their resources can allow. So that's the sort of thrust of it.
Great. I like the idea of a fence with like cat flaps for kiwi to get through, but not let the other animals, like you let your cat in but not your dog, sort of thing.
They wouldn't be cat flaps, would they?
Will they be a kiwi flap? Yeah.
Kiwi flap.
Yeah. And patent that one.
Yeah, we are. We have got a camera network in there, and we are picking up really high numbers of cats. Cats aren't a threat to kiwi, but they are a threat to other biodiversity in there. So, while ungulates would be a major contributor to positive ecosystem, there'll be more work to do, and just extend an invite to the perhaps more bush savvy councillors. It's pretty rugged in there, but I'd be happy to take people in for a walk along with our team at some point, perhaps in the new training or towards the end of this one, show them around the scale of the damage from ungulates.
So it will be a cat flap for the feral cats. So we need to have a guillotine that comes down and with AI to make sure it's not a kiwi.
Okay. Lovely, thank you very much. Any other questions? Look forward to perhaps we could workshop that design and naming, I think, too. So I think that will conclude that. I just want to say for that item, thank you very much for the multitude of staff who put all that information together and has captured an incredible amount of work very succinctly. And it provides a really good update for most of us, of course, know what's happening in our own hood, but to also see what's happening in other patches is really, really useful. And thank you very much, Leanne. So I think we'll be able to conclude our meeting now. It's been a really good morning, good agenda, thank you very much. Really good papers, I want to say, as per usual. And I appreciate particularly the earlier paper on Belmont, how we kind of worked that to really some really good recommendations that got us across the line today, and just so appreciated our community coming in. That was really, really helpful. So I just want to say we'll finish now and we will resume our workshop at 1 o'clock. So everybody has half an hour. Councillor Duthie, do you want to close with a karakia, or I can? I've got. Yep. Okay. I'll have a karakia. Kia hora tina rena, kia pakapapa, ponamu, te moana. He huriahahi, mā tātou e te rangi nei. Araha atua, araha mai. Tātou e tātou katoa. Hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora, everybody.